Hey Kobe, hey Celeste, welcome. Hey Memento Mori, good to see ya. Hey Copper Lily. Oh, thank you Kobe. Happy Easter to you too. Thanks for the follow, Auntie. Welcome everyone. I hope everybody's having a great weekend. Happy Easter if you celebrate Easter. We're gonna get started here in about 1 minute. Hey Abdallah, welcome to the stream. All the way from Kenya. Thanks for stopping in. All right. Hello, 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 folks. I hope y'all are doing well. I'm having a great weekend so far. It's a beautiful day where I live. I hope it's a beautiful day for you as well. Happy Easter. As I said before, if you celebrate Easter, happy Easter to you. Otherwise, happy Sunday. I'm wearing my the only pink thing I own, which is this pink sweater. So that's the closest I have to an Easter garment. But yes, welcome everybody. And also, too, before we kick things off, please, if you have a family event or if an event with friends today that you should be at instead of hanging out on my stream, then please go do that family or friend event. You should never skip out on family or friend time just to tune into a Twitch stream. Although I am flattered, but please go join your family or friend event. Otherwise, feel free to hang out here with me. And thank you for coming by. Thanks for picking this stream. So, what are we doing today? Well, today is going to be continuation of last week's stream. If you weren't here last week, that's perfectly fine. That's okay. Um, what we're going to do today is we are going to take an app that was previously only read only, and we're going to add update functionality to it. And what this app is for is it's a grave essentially an app that allows somebody to search the graves in a local cemetery. And this is a real app. This is going to go, it's going to be live in my local museum, sponsored by my local library. And essentially, it's going to allow folks from the city to come and search for their friends and relatives in this app. And it's going to return information about them, such as when they were born, when they died, whether they were a veteran, any historical notes about that person. And the reason I'm doing this is because I have started volunteering for my local library at a local museum. And one thing I noticed is that they have a big old binder where you can look people up in the local cemetery, but it's a big old binder, right? It's a paper binder. Essentially a bunch of it's a bunch of Excel spreadsheets that were printed out and put into a binder, and they have it all arranged very nicely. But still, if you, let's say your aunt, you know, you're looking for your aunt in the local graveyard, you know that she's buried in there somewhere, and you only know her maiden name. And for those of you whose English, who may not be native English speakers, maiden name is just the woman's name or the person's name before they're married. So they change their name when they get married, their surname. And so whatever their surname was before they were married, that's what we call the maiden name. And so maybe you know your aunt's maiden name, but that might not be the name that's, in the binder in alphabetical order. So you don't know where to find her. And so with this particular app, you can look this person up in a variety of different ways and hopefully find them a little bit easier. The local cemetery that I am cataloging has like 4,000 people in it. So that's a lot of people to look through in a paper binder, right? So yeah, 4,000 people in it. And so I decided to digitize this essentially grave registry and put it in a database. And so I've done that. And the lovely thing was I showed it to some of the library folks just yesterday, actually, and they were absolutely overjoyed. They thought it was the coolest thing ever. They were like, we couldn't have done this in a million years. And really, in reality, it's a really simple app. So, just to show you what it is, kind of what we worked on last week, of course, my windows didn't stick together. Um, Really, you can just search for a name, like, say, let's just say I know the last name starts with M. We'll search, and it just goes into a Supabase database and it pulls back all the information that they have on these people. So let's say, their last name maybe was Moore. So we can search by last name, we can search by first name, birth year, death year, any of that stuff. And it'll bring back all the information that they have on this person. And this is data that was generated by ChatGPT. This is not the real data. I have the real data, but I feel like it would be disrespectful for me to broadcast that sort of thing on a Twitch stream. So this is all ChatGPT generated data, which we're going to be using. It's all the same fields, just ChatGPT wrote it for me. So just FYI, this is not real. Raz says, when I die, I want to live on in a database. Yeah, I mean, really, right? Like, that's the modern way of being remembered. And if you live on in a database, that's probably your information is much more accessible than if you were in a book somewhere, right? And so, hey, it's the modern way of being remembered. And there are wonderful sites out there, so like findagrave.com. Which is a great place if you're ever wondering, you don't know where someone's buried, you're looking for relatives, that kind of thing. Findagrave.com is great. However, it's not local, right? It's a worldwide database, or at least a national database. And it doesn't have local information. It doesn't have that local sort of that special touch of someone who is in the local area who's really curating this information. And so that's why I'm building my own database just for my local area, with some data that's been hand curated by some very dedicated people, and really making it accessible to everybody. So the way it currently works is that, like I said, it's only read only. You can search by last name, first name, birth year, death year. And what it's doing is it's hitting a Supabase database. Go here to the table editor. We can see what it looks like. And it's really just a giant table that's capturing all this information. Let me see if I can collapse this. Maybe. Can I collapse you? No? Okay. But yeah, we're just capturing a bunch of fields. Faux ghosts. Mohammed said, hi, Auth is really important. I needed it. Yeah. And so that's one of the features we're going to be adding today. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But first, I'm just getting, for folks who didn't tune in last week, I'm just getting them familiar with kind of how the project exists currently. And then I'll talk about what we're going to add to it. And so we're using, we're using a Supabase database here. And just as a reminder, what type of database are we using here? What type of database would you call this? There's several main types of database structures. And what do we call this? Yeah, exactly. So this is what's called a relational database. And what makes it relational? Why do we call it relational? Move this over a little bit more. Hey, thanks, thanks, Lawrence. Happy Easter to you too. Hey, Juan. Resurrection year. Oh man, that would be, then we're talking zombies. That'd be a little wild. But yeah, so why do we call a database that looks like this, where we have all these rows and columns? Why do we call it a relational database? Also, if you're new to the stream, I ask you guys questions too. I don't just talk the whole time. So you don't have to answer, but if you know the answer, feel free to. Also, too, if you're new to the stream, we've got several new folks here today. Feel free to ask questions at any point. This is very much a teaching stream. So you are welcome and encouraged to ask questions and say, I don't know or I don't understand if something isn't clicking for you. Yeah, exactly. Renitz and web developer and Juan, you're all correct. So the reason why we call it a relational database is because you can have multiple tables, so multiple entities with rows and columns like this, and you can relate those things together via keys essentially. So a unique identifier of some kind. In this particular table, our key here, you can see the little key symbol, is this just ID value. And this ID value is unique for every single row. And the reason we have a unique value like this is because, for example, people can have the same name, right? And when I was actually looking at the real data, it's incredible. There are so many people, and oftentimes people buried in the same location. You know, we're talking fathers and sons, you know, yeah, it seems like mostly fathers and sons. You know, a father, especially in the olden days, it was a lot more common. Fathers would give their son literally the same name, sometimes even the same middle initial, and then they would end up buried in the same plot. So there's really not much to distinguish the two, other than some kind of a unique identifier. I also learned later that there is another unique identifier, which we'll talk about in a little bit. It's called the memorial ID, and this is the same ID that findagrave.com uses, which is actually in the data set I received. So I've added that as another column. So that'll actually be our primary unique identifier. But I didn't know about that when I set up the test data. So there you go. But yeah, so this is called a relational database because you can relate tables by keys, and also inside of a single table, so inside of this table called grave register, the rows themselves are related to each other. Everything in a particular column is going to have the same properties. So, for example, we can kind of see the properties if we look at the column headers here. So, for example, death date is a type of date, right? So, if I try to write anything to this column that is not a date, like a number or text, it will be rejected. I can't write, bad data to this column. So all entries in this date column have to be dates. And for age, this is a number. Specifically, it's an integer. So it has to be a whole number. Can't be a decimal or anything like that. So anything in this column has to be an integer, right? And so relational databases are defined as such because not only do you have relations between tables, you also have relations between the rows in those tables. I can quickly do really mass queries, mass aggregations, a lot of really hardcore data analytics from a single table just because the rows are already in the same place. They're all related to each other. They all have the same data and the same formatting. So that's really the power of relational databases. And that's why they are literally the backbone of data everywhere around the world. I know in 100 devs, we don't really teach relational databases or SQL, but that is going to change in cohort 3 because we've seen the value of getting people familiar with that type of structure because it's literally everywhere. It's far more common than document-based databases or what we would use when you use MongoDB. Now, not saying MongoDB is bad. MongoDB is excellent for non-structured data, for storing weird data that doesn't necessarily fit into a standard structure. It's fantastic for that. But for transactional type of data, like for example, a social media application or a data thing like this, where you have structured records with the same type of data every single time, then a relational database is pretty darn good. Yes, there's primary keys and foreign keys. Those are common things you'll hear about when you're working with relational databases. We're not really going to touch on those today, but yeah, understanding keys is really important. Hey, Harpanova, welcome to the stream. They say, sorry, I'm new here. Nothing to be sorry about. Welcome. But is there a reason you chose EJS over other options? Yeah, that's a great question. So if you look at my YouTube channel, exclamation point YouTube, you'll see that I do often use other tools like React. We've done some stuff in Astro. I'm working on something in Next.js. So I mean, yes, I definitely know how to use more advanced frameworks, but as always, it's about the right tool for the job. And in this case, this particular app is just going to be running on a library kiosk, and it can't be complicated. It can't be overly styled. It can't be, it really has to be bare bones, because a lot of the types of people that are going to be using this application are not going to be comfortable with complicated technology. They need it to be simple. They need it to be just does what it says on the tin. And so with that in mind, I don't really need a complex framework for this. I don't need something like React. It doesn't need to be super responsive. It just needs to display the data in a simple way. And EJS really does that for me here. Another consideration is that this app needs to be easy to maintain. So if I move away, for example, and somebody needs to, take this on and maintain it, something like React may be a bit too much to understand if you don't already know React. But if you know HTML and CSS and basic JavaScript, then you can pretty much get your head around EJS. So it was really a consideration of those things: maintainability, usability, simplicity. But great question though. I do have prior knowledge about EJS. Yes, that's true. Um, and I have used other frameworks like Handlebars and that kind of thing. Yeah. You can also build without or build your own tools. Yeah, exactly. And it's always, I don't really have any bias toward any particular tool either. I like using them all. I really love React actually. But that doesn't preclude me from, learning other stuff. I think what's really important is that you never let yourself get sucked into that Twitter mindset of like learning always the new best thing, or you have to always use a particular framework, or one particular framework is the best. And I talk about this a lot, because people, always have like opinions on what's best, but it's more about the right tool for the job. As web developers saying, um, they're here to build quicker, but you can also build without or build your own tools. Yeah, exactly. And it's good to practice the basics too. Whenever you go back to basics, it's amazing how much you forget. um, if you've been using frameworks for a while and you're like, wait, how do I just build like a basic form? What does it do? Like what do I have to do to just make a form work without, controlling it with React state or whatever? It's amazing how quickly those basics can like just fly out of your head. So it's also good practice too. I would highly recommend it. Go back and build some basic HTML apps occasionally. Mom says I forgot the pure JS. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, great question though, Harp Nova. I really like that question. It's the question of why you're choosing to do something a particular way is always a great question to ask yourself, as well. Like, why did I pick this? Did I pick it because I like it, which that's valid too? Did I pick it because it works best? Did I pick it because I felt like I had to? Like, what's the motivation? Vanilla JS. Yeah, I mean, I work in Vanilla JS a lot. It works pretty darn well for what it does, right? It's a little wild, it's Wild West, but it's fun to use. So anyway, what are we going to add to this? So right now, like I mentioned, well, I guess I should say this is actually the completed version. So spoiler alert, but um, this app started out as only read only. I didn't want to add any more features without first checking with the library that this is actually what they wanted, because they could have said, oh no, we don't want that, or no, we aren't going to be able to get a computer to run it on, or anything like that, which is fine. Then I'm not out anything. But I did also, from the start, I wanted to add the ability to log in, particularly to have an administrator log in, not just anybody, and update a record. Because let's say you go and you look up your aunt in the cemetery and you find out that they spelled her maiden name wrong, right? You're like, oh, I wish we could update this. Well, you can. So with this application, somebody at the library could say, hey, I need some help. Can we update this record? And then an administrator could click on this admin link here. They can type in the username. And I know that this looks, more like an email than a username, and we'll talk about why that is in a minute. They can log in. And when they do, it will allow them to update a specific record. Now, in order for them to update a record, they need that unique ID that we talked about, that memorial ID. I need to rename this. It's actually memorial ID. So memorial ID, for example, we have one 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And when they do, they get all the information. Now, this is not formatted yet. I haven't bothered with styling, but what it's doing is it's going into the database, it's fetching all the data from that particular record with that matching ID, and it's putting it into these input boxes. So what I can do is I can go in there and I can change any of this data that I want. So I can update any of these records, and then I can click the update button, and it'll let you know that it's successfully updated that record. And then we can confirm this by going into the database and finding this person. And we can see here, so the person with the memorial ID of 123456, their record has been updated with a note to say devoted husband and father. Okay? So you might say, well, that's not so special, right? Anybody can build a CRUD application. Like, what's special about that? Well, the special thing here is what's going on behind the scenes, the authentication. So the authentication, what's going on behind the scenes here is we are at every point in this process, from the login onwards, we are checking to make sure that the person who's trying to update this record is actually an administrator, someone who's actually logged in. So, for example, before this page even gets shown, we make sure that they are logged in and that login was successful. And when they go to actually update a record, so when they click that update button, we check again to make sure that they're logged in. And not only that, we've also set up authentication against the database. So people who are not logged in aren't even allowed to make updates against the database. So we're using database side authentication as well. So if we look here in my authentication tab in Supabase, we can see that this is the user I've set up, and it's showing when they last logged in. So we can see I just logged in at, well, 3:18 my time anyway. 3:18 my time was the last sign in, and that person's currently signed in. And not only that, but I have specific policies set up to say people who are not logged in can only read data from the database. They can't do anything else. And people who are logged in, we can look at this policy. People who are logged in can only update. They can read and they can update. They can't insert, they can't delete, they can't do anything else. They can only read and update data. And we're checking that by using that user ID, the one I just showed you. So not only are we checking it on the server side, we're also checking it again on the database side. So even if they manage to spoof their way into the specific update page, or mock the URL, or send a specific JSON object or something like that, I don't know why they would, but anyway, the database is still not going to allow them if they have a valid session, or if they don't have a valid session. And then also, we can return home, and then we can go back to update, and we're still logged in because we haven't logged out. However, this session will also expire after 10 minutes. So we also, since it's in a public kiosk at a library, we also have a timed log out as well. So if they get logged out, they're still going to be on this page, but if they go to do anything, it's going to kick them right back to the login page. So let's say I'm going to go ahead and log out. This is going to end my session. And then I want to spoof this. I'm going to go, update. I want to go straight to the update page. I want to skip the login. You can't do that, because again, it's checking to make sure that you're logged in before it shows you that page at all. Even gives you the ability to get there. So it'll take you to the login, and then it'll redirect. Assuming that login was successful, then it'll redirect to the update page again. So again, I don't see this as necessarily a vector for attack, by malicious actors, but because it's going to be in a public location, accessible by the public, I think it's important that we try to protect these, this ability to log in and change things. Okay. Yeah, we could return the updated record after we do an update. Totally could do that. I thought about that. I just did. It's fairly small potatoes. basically I'm planning on adding like better styling and better layouts to these things, especially on that update page. But I think the main thing here is to focus on the authentication side of things and the actual update ability of making changes in the database. But yeah, we can definitely, I want to add more like user experience improvements definitely before this goes live. This is basically the minimum viable product of all the features that I wanted to add. WebDev says we need to work with roles, like if role equals administrator. Yeah. So when you're working in Supabase, um, some of you may have worked with authentication in like MongoDB before, where a lot of the times in MongoDB, we handle authentication on the server side. So authentication is exclusively handled on the server side. You have to install like extra packages. And then really you're just using MongoDB to like store the token and the like the username of the token, right? That's all you're doing in MongoDB. It's just the vessel where you put that stuff. However, Supabase is actually a lot better about authentication. Supabase makes authentication a lot easier because it has built-in authentication ability. Like we saw earlier, you can actually like store user values. It's super easy to set up. You can store information. It really expects you to do it by email, which is why I just kind of made up an address here. This is not a real email address. Um, but you can, invite people using email. And then once you've done that, it's going to store it here inside of Supabase. And then from there, you can set up specific access policies to see how people are going to be allowed to access your data. So, for example, let's say that you had made a social media app and you were using Supabase for your backend. Well, if you were implementing, say, like you wanted to add a delete functionality so people could delete their posts from, that they're maybe they accidentally or like and unlike something, right? They like their ex's Instagram post or they like their ex's social post, right? And while they were a little uh, over inebriated one night, and they'd see it the next morning, they wake up and they're like, oh my God, I can't believe I liked that post from 3 years ago. I want to take that away. And so they take off the like. But we wouldn't want them to be able to unlike other people's posts, right? We would want them to only be able to, like and unlike other people's likes. We want them to only be able to like and unlike their own stuff. You want to delete other people's posts. Yeah. So how do we protect that, right? How do we stop people from messing with other people's stuff that isn't theirs? Well, in MongoDB, you kind of have to do that yourself, right? You have to like compare user IDs manually. You have to do all these sorts of things. But in Supabase, you can simply create a policy just by using this little GUI here. For example, and they even have templates over here. You can say, well, enable delete for users based on user ID. So you say, all right, anything that's tied to your own user ID or tied to the ID of the user who's logged in, then only they should be allowed to delete their own stuff. They shouldn't be allowed to delete anybody else's stuff. Or stuff like this, update, only if they match the email address of the person who's logged in. So all these templates, you can literally just click and say enable, and you're done. You don't have to do anything else. The database is going to do that verification for you. Now, as we mentioned, you still want to have controls on the client side or the server side, like on your end, but you know that the data is going to be protected based on these policies that are built in. And a lot of the times that's kind of a feature or a function of relational databases that document-based databases just don't have, or they don't have the same robust level of implementation of this sort of thing. So security is really something that's kind of woven into, or it's easy to implement in a relational database like this, because you can apply it to a whole table all at once. You can apply the same rules to a whole table, and it's really easy to do. Welcome, a guy. How would you protect the database from SQL injection? Yeah, so there's several different ways you could do that. One of them is by implementing a policy that doesn't allow. Well, you want to make sure that you have your policies locked down, right? So you wouldn't want someone who isn't logged in to be able to make certain changes. You wouldn't want, anybody who doesn't have the correct credentials doing anything other than reading. You wouldn't want them updating, you wouldn't want them inserting, you wouldn't want them deleting, right? And then also for SQL injection, the best place to add that protection is also on your front end in your forms. So you'd want to make sure that you have your form types set. So your input boxes, if it's supposed to be a number, then you better have that type set to number. If it's going to be text, then text. But you can also add additional filters on forms. So let's say that you know that um, your input box should only ever be standard characters, right? No special characters, no brackets, no stars, no pound signs, none of that. You can set those types of limitations in the form itself. So, for example, you might use a little bit of regex to say no special characters, which would basically eliminate SQL injection, right? Because if you can't type special characters, then you can't type SQL. Well, I shouldn't say that. You could potentially type SQL, but it's going to be harder. Uh, so yeah, so you can protect for it in the form itself in the input boxes. You want to have those locked down. You can also scrub the data on the server side. So making sure that whatever they've entered meets the specific rules that you've set. So you never just want to allow free text entry in a form. You always want to have some kind of validation or check, preferably in on both the form side, so both the client side in the HTML or React or whatever, and on the server side, check in both places. But at the very least, you want to make sure your form has the appropriate types set for each input. 21 says, I recently implemented Supabase Auth into a project, but didn't know about policies. I just wrote my own handlers. Very cool. Yeah. Supabase has really robust auth, and they really, really want you to use it. Like they yell at you if you don't have like row level security enabled. They really, really do not like it if you don't have policies set up. So I would highly suggest just use what's built in, and then that'll make sure that your database is protecting itself. Yeah, you can use ORMs, definitely. No worries, 21. Yeah, you can use ORMs, definitely, but you don't have to. You can still make things safe without using ORMs. Um, and whenever possible, I like to keep things close to native SQL, or closer to native SQL, but that's just a preference. I'm a SQL developer, so, and Supabase doesn't even use native SQL either. We'll see in a minute that the way that Supabase is set up, you're actually using specific Supabase methods to make queries. So SQL injection here wouldn't really even work anyways. Hey, JR. Welcome. All right, so these are the policies we've enabled. I will say I did struggle with the policies a little bit, because I wanted to basically allow everyone who's logged in, to allow the administrator who is logged in to update every single row. Whereas Supabase is like, are you sure you don't want to filter by email or ID? And I'm like, no, I just want somebody who's logged in to be able to update whatever the heck they want. So that took me a little bit to figure out. But in the end, this is what my policy looks like. So essentially, it's just allow authenticated updates is the policy name. Grave register is my table name. And this is just essentially the schema here, public. And essentially, we're just saying where the logged in value is not null. So somebody's logged in, great, they can do whatever they want. And what it's doing is specifically it's allowing them to update. Okay. Hey, Pipes, thank you so much for the follow. So any questions on this before we move on? Oh, and you can even do stuff like configure the redirect URL, so where it should redirect after somebody logs in. I mean, you can do a lot of server side controls in Supabase itself. When we look at the code, we'll find that I'm actually keeping a lot of this control in the server, but you don't have to. You can, have Supabase redirect someone after they log in. You can even have like email templates. You can have rate limiters, like a whole bunch of stuff you can do. There's even hooks. I haven't done anything with this for, you can even set up your access tokens through Supabase, but I'm not doing that. We're going to stick with things more on the server side other than just the database protections. All right. So policies, those are protecting my table. But we are still pretty much handling authentication on the server side outside of the actual Supabase login. Redirected Rick Astley. Yeah, we could definitely rickroll them if we wanted to. Yep. All right. So how do we do that then? Well, let's go ahead and get started. So we've set up our policies on the database side. We have our data in the table already. And so we're going to start with the read-only version of the code, kind of how I talked about. And what we're going to do is I'm essentially just going to walk through how we add authentication, how we add a login, how we process that login, how we validate logins, and then how we create the update functionality for this application. Hey, Malar. Yeah, Malar says it's like Firebase. It is. Yeah. So specifically, Supabase is an open source version of Firebase. It's not owned by Google, but it is. Oh, thank you so much for the subscription, Copper Lily. Thank you. But yeah, Supabase is essentially the open source version of Firebase. That's probably why it looks familiar. So if you like Firebase, you'll like Supabase even better because it's free. But thank you so much for the sub, Copper Lily. You're very cool. Thank you so much for subscribing. Natsusama says, "Hi, this is a continuation of some other project?" Yes, it is. If you want to see the project, you can do !project in chat. That will give you a link to the repo. And if you look at my commit history, the current commit is for the full version of the project, but the previous commit is for a read-only version. So what we're going to do today is we're going to start with the read-only version, and we're going to update it until it matches the version that's in the repository. And we're going to talk through each of the steps of adding authentication and adding update functionality to the app. Okay? Cool. Bombaloni says, "Is there any dummy data we could grab for those of us who missed part one?" I had ChatGPT generate some data for me, so you could do that. I don't have any dummy data posted publicly currently, but you could have just any online tool generate it for you. Any ChatGPT or Copilot generate the data for you. Really, the basic IDs that you would need would be essentially just first name, last name, birth year, death year, and then a memorial ID. Like, so 5 fields. So you can have GPT or Copilot generate some data for you if you want. All right. Okay. So what I have pulled up here is essentially the read-only version. We can see that right now we only have one view, and it's an EJS view. And this is essentially that home page with the form where they put in their information, and then they get search results back. And how this works is it basically says, all right, it sends the search off to the server. The server does a quick select query against the database. So just select where, any of these fields match. And all these fields are optional. So if they don't enter anything in any of the fields, it's going to return back all the records from the table. If they enter last name, it's going to check, do a filter on last name. If they enter just birth year, it'll do a filter on birth year. Or if they fill them all out, it'll add all of those as filters in the query. And then if there are records to return, it essentially just sets up a table, and then it loops through the object that they got back. And for each record, it creates a new row in the table. So essentially what they're doing here is we're creating the header row, and then we're looping through the result, and we're creating a new row and a new cell for each record, and then all the fields in that record. So what you get is a table of varying length with all the fields populated. Mylar says, "I wouldn't use Supabase for personal projects. It needs to scale, as it pretty fast becomes very costly." Yeah, the nice thing here is that Supabase is perfect for this project because it's not going to scale. It's going to be an application that's only used in a small library, probably by maybe a dozen people a couple times a week. So it's not going to scale. So that's why this free tier of Supabase is absolutely perfect for this. But yeah, that's one thing you do need to be careful about, is that a lot of these online tools, regardless of what they are, I mean, outside of Supabase specifically, you are going to hit some kind of a cap at some point, and so you do need to be prepared for potential charges if your app does become suddenly popular. Which I don't think that's going to happen here. And then so essentially what we're doing here is we're creating new rows for each record, and then if there's nothing returned, then no records are returned. So on the server side, how that looks is we're literally just rendering the page at first, and then we're doing a get. When they enter a search, we're essentially pulling the search fields out of the query. We're setting up our Supabase query here. We're saying select, from our table, select these fields. And then we have these optional filters that are only applied if the user submitted something in that field, right? So if they submitted something in birth year, then it adds it to the query. If they submitted a last name, then it's doing a wildcard search on last name, first name, et cetera, et cetera. Free tier very easily becomes free tiers. Yeah, very potentially, definitely. Yep. So you just need to be careful. But for hobby projects, I'm always very grateful when tools do have free tiers. That's actually like one of if someone reaches out to me wanting them to sponsor them, like my criteria is like, do you have a free tier? Because if you don't, then I mean, aren't we all glad that like GitHub has a free tier, right? Stuff like that. So I don't begrudge uh, tools that have free tiers. I think it's good business practice. Like web developer said, free tier is like a trick to hook you to use and become comfortable and addicted to their product. I mean, yeah, it definitely is, but I think it's fantastic and I love that they do it, honestly. Like I know Microsoft does that very explicitly, right? They have free tiers for individual users. I mean, they make Visual Studio free um, for hobby projects and stuff. I mean, I know what they're doing and I don't mind. So essentially what we're doing is we're setting up the query, and then here is where we're running the query, and then we return the records, we re-render the homepage. Thank you so much, Piorzin. Thank you for the follow. We re-render the index page and we pass in those records, and that's what creates that table that we saw earlier. And so that's really the setup for the server at this point. Now we're going to have to add a lot more stuff to this in order for our login to actually work. But I think what we'll start with is the EJS on the view side. Okay, so we're going to start by building out our additional views that we're going to need to make this work. So if I want to add authentication, what additional views do I think I'm going to need in order for this to function? What's some additional stuff I might need? What's another view I might need if I want to add authentication? Yeah, we're probably going to need some kind of a login page, right? So I'm going to go ahead and here for under views, I'm going to go ahead and add login.ejs. This probably doesn't have to be EJS, but we're just keeping things consistent and keeping stuff in the same location. It doesn't really matter. So yeah, we're going to need a login page, and then we're also going to need an update page where we're actually going to do the updates, because I want to put this as a separate page so that I can control how we redirect to it. I can, by making the update screen an actual separate page, I can lock it down so that people who aren't logged in can't even get to the page, right? It's going to be a lockdown route. We can't get there unless we're logged in, we have a valid token. Yeah, it feels now, but that's a good point. Is that sometimes those services will not tell you when you're getting close to a free tier limit. Yeah, and then you get you get a surprise bill, which is never a fun thing. Definitely. Yeah, they should enforce budget for free tiers. That would be nice. Definitely. All right, so let's start with our login page. So I can start with my basic HTML5 template. Oops. Not going to do it for me. There we go. Oh my goodness, Sloop, thank you so much for the subscription. Everybody's so generous today. Thank you so much, Sloop. You're very cool. Thank you for subscribing. Good to have you here, Sloop. Oh, thank you, Sloop. All right, so real quick, I'm just going to kind of fill in the standard stuff. I'm going to copy my styles from one of my other pages, just drop those in. I am going to build out a style sheet now that I have several pages in this app. But for now, we're just going to use a style tag in order to just, make things the appropriate size. But again, it's an MVP. Now, for my login, I can use a standard form. And for that particular form, I'm going to give it a specific path or a specific route called login. You always kind of want your routes to reflect what they're doing. Savers, thank you so much for the follow. Now, what type of an action is this going to be? So by default, forms are a get action, right? But what type of action should we consider a login to be, probably? Yeah, probably a post. Yep. It's going to be a post. So we can give it a specific method of post. And I know that forms are get method by default, but I do generally like to kind of declare that explicitly. Hey, it's a get. Hey, it's a post. Whatever. So just so we know exactly what's happening and what route that's going to hit. All right, and I'm also going to give it an ID. Actually, I don't think I'm using this, but whatever. It's not going to hurt anything. Of just login form. And then in my input, I'm going to just have a couple divs. And I also am going to have a label. Oops. And an input. And I'm going to update these, but for now, we'll just copy and paste. The divs are really just for formatting. The label is for accessibility. And my first box is going to be username. And then my second input is just going to be text, and it's going to have a matching ID so that so the browser knows that this label belongs to this particular input box. What else do we need here on this input? What else do we need? So I know that the ID here is associating this label with this input box, but what else do I need in order to make sure that my form is going to work? Hey, Rats Q. Welcome back to the chat. You got a stream streak, apparently. That's new. Not seen that before, but awesome. Good job. Rat says, will you add placeholder? Excuse me. In the case of username and password, I'm not really sure we need it, but we can definitely add a placeholder. We have a label, which is going to really kind of take care of that, I think, for accessibility reasons. They'll know what the box is for if they're using a screen reader. But, excuse me. But yes, we can add, placeholders. Like, for example, on the main form, we could add, like a placeholder year so that they know what's supposed to go in the year box when they're searching. So yeah, placeholders are really helpful when it's not clear what an input box should be for. Those are great attributes to use, definitely. Yeah, so I asked what was the other thing that we need, and Renit says name ? And yes, that's right. We do need to add a name. Now, why is name important? Why is that required for this form? I'm going to just give it the same. I'll fill out this one as well. Why do I need to add a name to my input box? Natsusama says easier to get the data. Steel Toad says it won't be sent without a name. Set Logic, welcome to the stream, Set Logic. Good to have you here. They said for the form data, I guess. Harpanova says to get the value on submit. Yes, then you're all exactly right. Yes. So if you do not add a name attribute to your form data, your server, it's not gonna know how to read it. It's basically not gonna know how to read the data. It's not gonna be able to get the data correctly from the form, because really what this form is doing under the hood, all it's doing is it's taking the form data and it's bundling it up into a JSON object. So it's just putting it into an object with a bunch of key value pairs, and passing it and bundling it all up into the just a big old object and then chucking it up to the server. So essentially, if you don't add a name, you're trying to send up this object without the key in the key value pair. So how is the server going to read it? It's not going to know what that is. So this is a mistake that I've seen a lot of people make. I have made this mistake myself. And all of a sudden you're trying to submit a form, you've got everything right, you've installed everything, but because you don't have that name attribute, your stuff isn't getting read on the server side. And you're like, why doesn't this work? Well, because you didn't add the key in your key value pair. 21 says, is it name or is it ID? Well, you can think of ID more like the style side of things. That's how you're attaching your label, that's how you're applying styles, but the name is the key in your key value pair that you're actually sending up to the server. Because yeah, I've absolutely made that mistake more than once, and I know a lot of people who have too, because it's easy to forget. Okay, now what else do we need here? So we've got our username set up. In our password, so this is our password field here. What am I missing here? We need something additional when we're working with passwords. What's wrong with this? I'll make it easier. It's on this line. What's wrong with this? JR says, so it doesn't have to be a name per se, but it can be an ID number or something. Yeah, your server needs a way to know the subject matter of that input box, right? Not the value, but the subject matter. What is the thing that you are passing in that form? Like what is it supposed to be? And that's how you will access it on the server side. Arpa, thank you so much for the follow. Hi, Loxku, welcome to the stream. They say the type of. Yeah, so there's something wrong with the type, right? Because it's not just text, it's a password. And so what do we usually do with passwords? What do we usually, when you're working in a browser, what do you usually see when you type in a password? Just if you were to go to sign into anything right now, what do you see when you type in a password? Yeah, it's speaker. I like that. Yep, just the ... protected stars. Yeah. So there's a specific type in an input box, and it's type password. So you should use that so that they see the little dots instead of just the visible text. Okay, so we're going to use input type password, so it has the little dots, but when it packages it up and sends it to the server, it's still going to be, decodable as text. It's speaker. Thank you so much for the follow. Protected stars. Yeah, Hunter 2, basically. You don't want to see Hunter 2 in your password window. All right, so that's for our login. And then the last thing we need here is just a button to submit it. Oops. Type submit and save. Okay, so now that we've set up this route on the client side, we need to have a matching route on the server side in order to handle the login itself. And what we're doing here when we are logging in is actually going to be a couple things. We're going to be, number one, logging into the Supabase database. So remember, we set up this user in Supabase already. So we've got a user set up in Supabase. So we need to log into Supabase so that those policies can be applied and we can actually update records. And then we're also going to generate a session on our server side so that we can control things like routing. So a couple things are going to happen here. So I'm going to flip over to my server and we'll do the login for Supabase first, and then but we're also going to have to install one more package here to handle our sessions. But for now, we'll handle the login. So first thing I need to do, oh, thank you so much for the follows, Kelvin and its speaker, is I'm just going to copy my index render here. And first thing I need to do is actually just render my login page, right? So I need to show it to the user first before they can actually log in. So we need to have a route for that. So login page, and we're going to do res.render and just render login. I don't have to specify the path for this because my login page is already stored in my views folder. And so the browser is going to know, or sorry, my server is going to know exactly where to get it. So I can just say res.render login, and it's going to know exactly that it needs to render this page. So that's the first step. And then I can set up a route for the actual login action itself. So I'm going to say app.post because this is a post route coming from my form. And it's going to be listening on the login route. So app post login. And if I'm going to be logging into Supabase, what type of function should this be? If I'm going to be logging into Supabase, what type of function should this be? Now, I'm not asking for the specific Supabase method. I'm asking in general, what type of function should this be? Yeah, it needs to be async, right? Why is that? Why should it be an async function? If you're not familiar with async functions, is essentially, or asynchronous functions, is essentially like a promise, if you know what promises are in JavaScript. Why do we need that? Yes, Renitz, that's very succinct. Yep. Yeah. Narishka, thank you so much for the follow. Yeah, stuff takes time, right? We don't know how long Supabase is going to take to respond. It could depend on a lot of things. It could depend on Supabase's traffic volume. It could depend on your the user's internet connection, your internet connection, the latency in general and across the internet at that time. So there could be a lot of factors that go into how long it takes Supabase to respond with that login being successful. So in general, we want to use this as an async function because we want things to kind of hold off and pause and say, all right, did that work? If it worked, then we can move on to the next thing. But don't move on until we know that that login worked or until we get an error. So I'm going to say let, and also too, the next thing I'm going to, what I'm typing right now, this is literally straight from the Supabase docs. So Supabase has really good documentation. So if you're wondering how do I set up authentication in Supabase, just go to the docs, look at authentication, and you can literally copy this exact function. And we're going to, since we set it up asynchronously, we can say await, and we're going to say Supabase dot auth dot sign in with password, and we can see that it's giving me some options there. So sign in with password. There's other options too, like sign in with email or sign in with like an email link. So there's other ways to help folks sign into the database, but we're just going to use the standard email password combination. Email username. Whoops. Email is going to be username. Oh, come on. You're not helping. All right. Username and password is password. Now, one thing I'm missing here is actually getting that data from the body of the request. So I need to tell our server what is username and password. Well, that's easy to do, right? Since we have the form data, we can just say const username and password equals rec.body. So what I'm doing here is I am going into the request. So the request is the data that comes up from the client. The request goes up, response goes down. So request.body. And what am I doing here? What am I doing here? Yes. Essentially, I'm doing something called destructuring. And so what this allows me to do is to go into this object. Remember, it's an object, and pull out these two values and essentially both declare and assign variables called username and password at the same time. So essentially, I'm reaching in here, I'm finding the keys, username and password, getting their values and reassigning them to these two variables called username and password on the server side. So now, when I say email is username and password is password, it's going to have those values that whatever values I put in, they're going to be assigned in this object here. And what we're doing here is literally just using this built-in Supabase function, and we're saying, all right, try to authenticate with this email and this password. And then if there's an error, then we can, we're just going to throw that error in the console. Just say login error, and then whatever the message is. And then we can just also return, a specific status. We could render what I think I might do eventually is have a specific like login failed page, and then a button that redirects back to the login page, or maybe even just redirect back to the login page. But I haven't decided yet. So for now, I'm just going to send a status of failure. Again, that's more of a user experience type thing. It's less of a structural thing. So it doesn't have to be all this. Whenever you're building something, like this, where you don't have very clear requirements and you're just kind of throwing stuff at the wall. It's important to not get too into the weeds on like the specifics, right? Like this works well enough for now. So it's good enough I like to say it's good enough for horseshoes and hand grenades. Login failure. Please contact library administrator. So that'll be good for now. And then I'll probably have more complicated behavior later. However, if the login is successful, then I want to do a couple of different things. So Neat Coder says, oh, we're still doing this app. Yes, we are adding update functionality and authentication using Supabase. So since we've been able to successfully log into the database, the next thing that I want to do is actually configure the session on my server side, because again, I'm going to use that server side session in order to control what pages the users can and can't get to unless they're logged in, and what actions they can perform. So we're going to do some validations before the user tries to perform specific actions to say, are they authenticated? If yes, then they can do this. If no, then it should take them to the login page or kick them out or do whatever. Sinbleed says, is it OAuth 2.0 browser-based flow with IDP, or just works on JWT? So actually, what we're going to be using is something fairly simple. We don't need to get too crazy here, because again, Supabase is handling authentication with the database natively. So in our server, I just want basically a token so that I can validate whether they are logged in and also time them out after a specific amount of time. So after 10 minutes, I want them to not be able to do stuff anymore. I want them to have to re-authenticate, because if they, leave the update window open and walk away without logging out, then I want it to still time them out after 10 minutes. So I don't need really anything complex here, especially since we're handling database access on the Supabase side. So all I'm going to use for session control is essentially just a package called Express Session. So we're going to install that in just a minute, but we're going to just basically say require Express session. So I can just say npm I express session, and that's going to provide all the basic session token controls that I need. Yep, we just basically need to implement access control to specific pages and actions. Yep. And we're gonna, and sometimes I think we handle like authentication in the past, I think we've handled authentication on the client side sometimes. But again, since this is going to be a public application in like a library kiosk, I really don't want to do things like hold anything in local storage. I don't want to do any of this locally. I want to handle it all on the server side. It's going to be remotely hosted. I don't want anything managed locally, so people can't get in there and futz around with, local storage or session storage or anything like that. I just want it to all happen on the server. So I've installed Express Session, and now I can just say require Express Session, and this will give me all the control that I need. All right, so now that I've done that, I need to configure a little bit of middleware. So what we're going to do is I'm going to configure our session settings, and I'm going to finish that login function, and then we'll take a break, okay? Sin says Express session is great middleware. You get all in request object with user info loaded and express request object. Yeah, it's great. It without, having to get too crazy with it, you can basically just control everything from the server side. Yep. So in my middleware section, I can say app.use and then app.use session. And inside this session is where I'm going to configure some specific settings. So I can set a secret, and I'm just going to keep it default for now, but I'll set this to something better later. And then resave is going to be false. And these are basically just default settings. I'm not getting too crazy here. Save uninitialized. I think I just copied this from like the default settings somewhere. And then this is the important part. This is the part I actually did want to configure. So this is the cookie, or how long the session is going to stay live. So the cookie in internet terms is basically a thing that gets saved, right? It's a little piece of information that persists even if you reload the page. So we're going to have this session set to expire and have it forget that information after a specific amount of time. And you can configure this however you want, but I'm going to set a max age of, what is that, 600,000. And that's literally 10 minutes in milliseconds. I don't know, maybe you can do it other ways, but the default is milliseconds. So that's 10 minutes in milliseconds, I hope. If that's not right, let me know, but I think that's 10 minutes in milliseconds, because it's like 60 times 10,000, right? Yes. Because 1,000, there's 1,000 milliseconds in a minute, and so 60 seconds in a minute, and times 10,000, I think, is right. Okay, cool. Thanks, Set Logic. Neat Coder says, so each user has to log in using their Supabase? No. So let me go back to that and we'll just recap real quick. So in Supabase, I specifically set up a user called admin. So I only have one user set up. So one user set up, and that user is the one that we're going to be logging in with. So at the library, remember, this is going to be like a public library kiosk app. And so the librarian is going to have those credentials, or any librarian is going to have those credentials. And so they can log in and actually have update privileges in the database. Any user can come and use the app at any point. So any user can just walk up to the kiosk and search for somebody. So the policies that I've set up in the database are every user has read access no matter if they're logged in or not. So we can see that select enable read access for all users is enabled. But only authenticated users, so people who've logged in using that specific admin account, they're the only ones that can do update. So this is the privilege here, update versus select for everyone. Does that make sense, Neat Coder? So if they're not logged in, they can only read. Yeah, good. If they are logged in, then they can read and update. Okay. Get the right one here. So what we've done here is we've set up this session, and that's just going to hold that authenticated status for 10 minutes. And after 10 minutes, they're going to be logged out, and they're no longer going to be allowed to access anything, they would have been if they were logged in. All right, so I want to finish the login function, and then we'll take a break. So we did the login, error handling, Okay, so after they've successfully logged in, we're basically saying, all right, if there's an error, then exit the function. But if that login with Supabase was successful, then we can give them a user ID and set, this is the important part. We can set their authentication status to true. So now, once we've set their authentication status to true, we can use that status to double check before they do things like try to update a record or go to the update page. We can just say, hey, are they authenticated? If true, then great. If false, then don't let them do it. So it's an easy true false Boolean check to see, are they supposed to be doing what they're currently doing? We could also add a chatting page. Not for this application, definitely not needed. But I have made chat apps before. If you're interested in how to make a real-time chat app, something where you can send messages back and forth to friends using WebSockets. I've actually done a stream on that. You can search, on my YouTube channel, you can search for chat app. And I did a real-time multi-user chat room app previously on my stream, which was really fun. WebSockets, yeah. A guy named EJ said, should user ID be an auto-generated value, or is it okay to hard code it? So in this case, we're only ever going to have one account that's going to be logging in. But if you had multiple accounts, what I would suggest is setting the user ID to whatever that user ID is in your database. So if I had multiple accounts in my Supabase here, I would probably set it to this value right here. Hope you can see that. Is it behind my chat window? No, you can see it. So it does, for each user you create, it creates a unique UID. So I would probably set it to that if you had multiple users. Actually, I wouldn't probably do that. I definitely would do that. But here I'm cheating a little bit because I know that there's only ever going to be one account for this. There's never going to be a need for multiple accounts. So I have it hard coded. If I need to change that in the future, I can. I would just do a query against the database to grab that UUID, but I'm not bothering with it for now. Yeah. Good question, though. All right, so authentication true. And then the last thing I need to do is, if they've logged in, I'm going to go ahead and redirect them to our update page. So we're going to we haven't done this yet, but we're going to set up a route for that. So it's just going to be update page. So the moment they log in and they're successful, they should immediately be sent to the update page where they'll be able to make updates. So you can kind of see our order of operations here, right? The first thing we do is we fetch the username and password. Then we attempt to log them into the database, because that's the most important part. And then if that worked, then we set up their session credentials on the server side. And then finally, we send them to the update page. All right, I'm going to go ahead and save this, and we're going to take a 5-minute break. And then when we come back, what we're going to do is set up our routes for the update page and start setting up that update page functionality. Okay? If you have any questions, feel free to ask during the break, and then I'll answer them when we come back. Okay? Cool. See you back here in 5 minutes. Please do get up, get yourself some hydration, do whatever you got to do, and I'll see you back here shortly. right, folks, we got about a minute left in the break, so come on back whenever you're ready. Get yourself some hydration. If you've been sitting this whole time, I told you not to, but I can't stop you. So at least do some stretches, roll your wrists, roll your neck, don't get carpal tunnel. And whenever you're ready, come on back. Pet your dog, pet your cat, pet your significant other with their permission, of course, and then come back. Great question there, Narishka. I'll answer that as soon as we're back. And we're back. Welcome back, everybody. Narishka asks, so if front end is able to somehow change the session user ID to admin, could they access the admin privileges? So no, not in this case. And there's a couple reasons for that. So the first reason is that we aren't just relying on the session user ID to control things. Actually, we're not going to be relying on that at all. We're not going to be relying on that for anything. We are going to be relying on this value right here, but only for navigation reasons. So the important thing here is, yes, there are, we could be a lot more stringent about this, but this is really more for routing and navigation. Like, I don't want them to be able to go to the update page if they aren't logged in. I don't want them to, be able to click buttons, or if they try to go to those places, I want them to get rerouted back to the login page. So I want to be very, I want to kind of guide the user to where they're supposed to be if they somehow get somewhere they're not allowed. And also, I want to log them out after a certain amount of time. NPC Vader, thank you so much for the follow. Maui, thank you. That's so very sweet. But so this is really more for routing purposes. The real protection, I mean, it's here too, right? We're protecting the user interface with this value here, but the real protection of the data itself is on the database side. Remember, we are capturing login not just in the client and on our server, but also in the database itself. So you can see the database is tracking when that last sign-in was, and we have specific policies that are only allowing updates for truly authenticated users. Remember, we not only did, just set these values on login, the main trigger of whether those values get set at all is if this authentication is successful. Okay? So, this is also, this is protecting, this is going to be protecting us by not allowing users to get where they're not supposed to be. They can't even access those routes. They can't access those pages. They can't do specific actions. But, oh, thank you for the follows, Hype Bim. But the data itself is then protected by Supabase, given the policies that I've set on the database side. Okay? Hey, Grizz, good to see you. So you always want to kind of have multiple layers of protection if you can. In our server, we're going to be protecting routes. We're going to be protecting specific actions. And then in Supabase, we're actually protecting the data at the row level or at the table level with the policies that we've set. Good question. Okay. So we're redirecting back to the update page. So we haven't set up this route yet to actually display the update page. So let's go ahead and do that. So in my sort of my Git section up here for displaying pages, I can just copy and paste. And I'm going to set up that update page route. This is just for displaying the page itself, not actually doing anything with it yet, but Git update page. And here's going to be my first check. So before I even display the update page, I'm going to say if that authentication value is set to true, only then should it actually display the update page. So if I'm not logged in and I try to go to the update page and I'm not, I don't have that authenticated value set to true, it's not going to let me get there. We're actually going to have it display the login page instead if they aren't logged in and they try to go to that route. So even if they type the route manually into the browser bar, or they're going, who knows, they get there through some weird link or something. Maybe they favorited the page, right? They added it to their bookmarks. If they're not logged in, they're not allowed to get there. And I'm going to be passing in some parameters here. We'll talk about those a little bit later. Just bear with me for now. And then if they aren't logged in, then I'm going to add an else here. And I could do this more concisely. I could do this as a one-liner, but I don't want to. So if they're not logged in, then we're just going to say res.render the login page instead. Okay. Now, here's a brain teaser for you. Notice that the format of this, the thing that checks whether they're authenticated, is rec for request .session.authenticated. Remember, we set that down here. Why did we set it to request? Why is it rec.session.authenticated? It's actually not records. This is correct. We'll talk about that later. Good catch, though. That's not the first time I've messed something up like that. But in this case, it's actually correct. Why is this REQ? Why is this a request? Oh, no worries, Copper Lily. That's fine. I mean, I've made enough mistakes in spelling for you to completely believe that is a mistake. And I'm sure I'll make more in the future. All right, I'll let you think about that. Think about this for a while. Why is this a request? But I'm Wildslayer says, a side question, if we're using expressed RESTful API, is sessions a good choice for tracking authenticated user on other API requests? I'm hoping I understand your question correctly, but that's basically what we're doing here, right? We're setting the authentication status when they log in, and then they're going to make a separate request to go to the update page, right? So this is a completely different request, a completely different route, completely different request. But, and this actually gets back to my question, this still works there, right? The status is still stored. So on a completely separate request, we can still say, yes, this user has a valid session, and we can use it to validate whether they should go to this page. Harpanova says, is it because you set it on, Narishka says, we're setting incoming request session contains authentication or not? That's correct. Yes. Yep. And Harpanova says, is it because you set it on the request object below? Yes. But the question is more, why did I set it on the request object? And Narishka is basically there. They say, yeah, because it's coming in. We're getting an incoming request, right, to go to the update page. And so essentially, we're getting this request with a bunch of stuff in it, and we're going to add to that request a session property with that authentication value set to true. So we're taking the existing request and we've added to it this authenticated value of true. And for any subsequent request, and this gets back to I'm Wildslayer's question. They said, okay, what about subsequent requests? That session is always gonna that session authenticated property is always going to be set for true until the request times out. Now, why? Why is that authentication status always going to be set to true, no matter whether it's a separate request or not? I'll give you a clue. I'll scroll up here a little bit. Remember this. What is this? What is, in server terms, in server vocabulary, what is this that we configured? the general term for it. And Destroyer Man says this is for nerds. It absolutely is. Come join us, fellow nerds, and nerd out about authentication on a JavaScript Express server. Please do. It checks, yes, but in general, when we see app.use, what is that? Or app.set, what is that? What do we call that? Destroyer says, I don't even know what this is. Well, feel free to stick around. If you want to learn web development, this is a teaching stream about web development. Yeah, it's middleware, right? This is middleware. What does middleware do? Why do we call it middleware? NeetCoder says, so session is like a cookie that holds your data? Yeah, well, a session is basically the extent of your being logged in. That session is literally, it's a session of login. It's preserving all your login information for however long that session lasts, either for 10 minutes or until you log out, and that session is destroyed. So what does middleware do? Just in general, not this specific piece of middleware, but what does middleware do? Why do we call it middleware? Why don't we just call it, like all the rest of these express methods? Why do we call it middleware and it has to go in a specific place in our server? Yeah, exactly, Star Fox and Narishka. Yeah, middleware goes between, because it's in the middle, it goes between the source and the destination. So going back to the question, what happens when, so we set this value, right? We set this authenticated value to true here, sure, but will that value persist in multiple in subsequent requests to the API? Yes, it will, because we're setting that value via middleware. And middleware sits between the client and the server. And all the data coming from the client has to pass through the middleware that's in the middle before the data gets to the server. So I think of middleware like the post office. So you put a letter in your mailbox. That's like you sending a request from the client. You put a letter in your mailbox, and your mail carrier picks up the letter, but they don't take it straight to the destination, right? It goes to the post office first. And what happens at the post office? Well, the letter gets sorted and it gets stamped and it gets additional things done to it to translate the address, to translate my terrible handwriting into something that's readable. It gets a barcode on it, gets a stamp checked, all those things. And so when the letter finally gets to the destination, it looks different. It has different characteristics than it did when it went into my mailbox, right? So it ends up at the destination different because it passed through some middleware, essentially. And so anytime, so when that authenticated status is set to true on the session middleware, anytime a request comes up from the client, it passes through the middleware, it gets that authentication status added to it, either true or false, and then it gets to the destination. So we can always check that authentication status on any subsequent request, because it's always going to be, it's going to get the barcode on it at the post office, right? Okay, so hopefully that makes sense why that works. We only have to set it once on the middleware. After that, it can always be checked in any of these routes that we want. So here on this completely separate route, we're saying, all right, display the update page, check if they're authenticated. It'll have that stamp on it from the middleware, either true or false. If it's true, then render the update page. If it's not, then go back to the login page and make them log in. Okay? So if that doesn't make sense, feel free to ask, but I hope that helps with why this works the way it does. Middleware is really powerful, but oftentimes we don't think about why. Like, you have to do some of this stuff for, every single server that you build, and you might not think, why do I have to do this? Well, because it's going to modify the data in such a way that coming from the client, your server can actually read it. No, thank you, Narishka. I'm glad. I'm glad it works. Glad it works for you. All right. So we did our update page. We're displaying it, but we haven't actually, set up anything as far as actually doing the updates yet. We're just displaying the page here. So we've done our login. Another thing I want to set up too before we go into really the update functionality. I want to also configure our logout ability. So I want there to be a button where they can explicitly click and log out without having to wait for that 10-minute timeout. So we're going to say this will just be a get route app.get. And there really isn't too much to this, but the main thing we want to do is just destroy that session cookie. So any of the stored data from the session, that authentication status, any of that, we want to destroy that. Get rid of it entirely. Luckily, with most, authentication tools, no matter what you're using, they're going to have some kind of a, destroy, delete, get rid of session function. So we don't have to do any of this ourselves. We can just say request.session destroy. Destroy. And again, this is all boilerplate stuff. You can copy it from the documentation on whatever authentication client you're using. It's all very standard. You just say, I said if error. Actually, we'll do this. If error. I don't expect there's an error. Usually logout is not, a problem unless you have your route screwed up. Throw the error. And then we can also just send a status of 500. Oh, sorry. Wait, no, it's outside the, is it? Did I put it in the wrong place? Oh yeah, my bad. I accidentally put it inside my other function. Good catch. All right, I'll move this. Let's see. Where's my open and close parentheses? Destroyed. Now I got my parentheses all screwed up. Okay, what I'll do here is copy this, that. Your route should always be separated. So we have our post here. Make sure I got my parentheses correct. Yes, that's good. This one's correct as well. Cool. I may have nope, that's fine. Okay, good. Yeah, I think we're sorted out. I'm Wildslayer says, will that destroy all sessions or just the user who sent the request? So in our middleware, we're basically just storing the current session. So what the user that's currently logged in, it should only destroy their session. Yeah. So fairly simple. Just get rid of whatever session is currently being used. Whatever session's currently being used by that user, get rid of that. And then finally, after they log out, I want to redirect them back to the home page. So they log out and then send them back home. Okay, save that. All right, so I've got we're displaying the update page. We have a logout function. We have login function. And so now I think we can actually move on to the actual update functionality. So the thing we're really here for, which is creating the ability to update specific records. So now, real quick, feel free to ask any questions here on login, logout, anything we've done here as far as authentication. But I think overall it's fairly simple, right? If we've done authentication in the past, it may have been a bit more involved just because you were working with something like MongoDB and you had to set up all the authentication yourself. Whereas again, MongoDB is handling most of this. It's storing the it's storing the user IDs. It's actually validating the authentication. We don't personally have to validate the authentication ourselves, whether or not it's accurate. We are basically just sending it off to Supabase, letting Supabase do that check for us. And then if that's successful, then we can, set up the session and stuff like that. So we don't have to, control that because Supabase is handling the auth. Yeah, go ahead and ask your question, Mariska. Or Narishka, sorry. Yeah, feel free to anybody can feel free to ask questions anytime if I'm talking or whatever. Usually, if I'm talking and I see somebody ask a question, I'll just finish what I'm saying, and then when I have a good moment to address it, then I will. While you're typing, Narishka, I think I'm just going to double check this. Yeah, I think we're good so far. This was our search route from before, so this is just the read-only route. So we're going to need a new route for actually doing the update. This is just a read-only select. So we'll have another route where we do an update. Yeah, feel free to ask your question, whatever, Narishka. I'm just going to go ahead and flip back to our update, but I can flip back to the server whenever you need. So again, we're going to just set up our basic HTML page format. But as a reminder, I'm Wild, so thank you for explaining. I used to work with PHP. There we need to point what session we want to destroy, like user ID and etc. And yeah, and again, if I had multiple users going on here, I probably would be more explicit about that. But I just know that there's only one user. So like I don't really need to be particularly careful, um, but in general, if there were multiple users, I would be more explicit. Without Narishka says, are we setting session for every user right now without user ID and without user ID? Sorry, I'm trying to understand your question. So essentially what we're doing here is we're setting up our session properties and we're setting a timeout on the session. Oh, I think I know what you're asking. Okay, sorry, that took me a minute. And we're setting the user ID hard coded here. Yes. So yes, you're right. We're setting the user ID hard coded here. But again, if I had multiple users, I would control the session by again getting the user ID from the database. And I might do this anyway. I was honestly lazy and I didn't want to do a separate query just to grab that UUID from the database and then apply it here because I know I only have one user. Um, so for the user ID admin, we're configuring that session and then we're setting its authentication status to true. So if I had another user like super admin and I had a separate UUID for them, I would set that separately. And then on my logout, I would, destroy the super admin session or the admin session or whatever specifically. But here we are just destroying the admin session. That's the only user we have. So yeah. Sorry, it took me a minute to get your question. But yeah, we are still setting a specific user ID. We're just hard coding it to admin. Again, if I set up more users for this, I would set that user ID for, user one, user two, user three, or probably more like the hash from the database. I would apply that to the user ID. Okay. Yeah. So if you were to do a console log on rec.session, and we could do that once we get this running, we could do that. Do a console log on rec.session, you would see that one of the properties is user ID, another property is authenticated, and then, we'd have more properties here. Super admin. Yeah. Yep, exactly. Okay, so let's go back to our update page, getting that set up. So I'm using the standard HTML format, but it's important to remember that we actually aren't writing HTML here. We are writing EJS. So this looks like HTML, but it's not. It's EJS. EJS renders out in the browser into HTML, but it actually isn't. What this allows us to do is to do things like encode JavaScript functions into our page here, and then which will then calculate and render into HTML prior to actually being displayed in the browser. So I think that's important to remember. It's easy to forget when you're using mostly, HTML tags, but this really isn't HTML. change this page title to update record. Got my style tags. These are just the same style tags I have been using. Again, I am going to add a style sheet, but again, it's still minimum viable product. All right, so the first thing I want them to do is I want them to be able to search for the specific record that they want to update. So they've realized that a record's incorrect, and I want them to be able to search on that memorial ID value that we talked about earlier. So the memorial ID is a unique identifier for the table. It's the same ID that you would find in like findagrave.com. So it's a unique ID. And so it will always only return one record. And even if it doesn't, which I don't see why it would, we're going to be controlling for that on the server side as well. So I'm going to create a quick form here. It's not going to be a very complicated one. And that form, actually, no, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a button to return home. So a little bit of basic navigation. So quick button to return home. That action is just going to be call the default route. And the method is just going to be get. And inside that form, the only thing I'm going to have is a button. And with a type of submit. And the text is just going to be return home. So simple as that. We don't have to do any additional configuration on this form for the server side because we already have a route for get and the slash, which is just display the home page. So this button is essentially just going to display the home page whenever you click it without any additional setup. Now I can set up a nav bar or something like that, but again, it's overkill for this particular application because it only has like 2 pages. So, and then I'm also going to add a logout button. Remember, we set up that logout route earlier. So logout method get. And again, we'll have another button with a type of submit and logout. And that logout route will also navigate to home. And here I'm just going to have some text with some instructions. So I'm literally just copying this from the repo. You can do that too. It just gives folks instructions on how to look up a grave record. And here I'm going to set up my search form. So this particular route, which we haven't set up yet, I'm going to set up as get update record, because the first thing we need to do, and I'll show the, I'll actually show the finished page again, just as a reminder for the sequence of events. Because I don't want people just free inputting data into the update form. You always know that whenever you let a user put in whatever they want into a form, it's going to be trouble, right? We know this. And we can see here, this is how the password box looks. All right. So how this is actually going to work is it's going to pre-populate the values of all those boxes with what's already in the database. So search. Now, I know this looks gnarly as far as formatting, but what we're more concerned about is the actual content here. So for each of the fields for this particular record that's currently in the database, it's going to pull those out and populate the input boxes with those values. And also, just by looking at this, what is something important that we are going to want to control? Yours says ew. Yeah, it really is. The formatting is nasty. I'm going to arrange these vertically and, fix the labels and stuff, but that really doesn't matter right now. What matters is the functionality. Rec1 says, what database is in the backend? It's Supabase. Supabase relational database is what we're using for our backend today. All right, so remember that I'm using memorial ID, this field right here, as my key value for searching and updating one individual record in the database, because memorial ID is a unique identifier. So if I'm populating these fields here, what's one thing that I want to make sure I control? Renate says some/all fields are required. Currently, none are required. No fields are required. They could just, click update again, or they could, I don't know, maybe they want to take their, father's death date out of the records. They don't want that to show up. So they could clear this out if they wanted. That would be fine. Inumore, thank you for the follow. And Rec1, thank you for the follow. Guccio, thank you for the follow. Guest 1301, thank you for the follow. Disorder, thank you for the follow. Yeah, we're going to want to be careful about memorial ID, right? Because what we don't want them doing is changing this field. I want to show it because that shows, that they, whatever they searched for, that's the record they got back. I want to show it, but I don't want to let them change it anymore. He says, love Voltron Pidge supremacy. Heck yes. Pidge is my spirit animal. I love her so much. Yeah, Voltron was a great show. So yeah, that's why she's my avatar. Narishka says, let's make that disabled. In theory, that would be great. Now, I will tell you that you cannot type in this box. You can probably hear my keys clacking. I'm trying to type in the box right now. I can't because I have set this to read only. You cannot type in there. Now, you might say, why wouldn't you just make this particular input box disabled? Does anybody know why you can't do that? Oh, no worries, Rekwan. They say, do you stream every day? I stream once a week on Sundays. I may put that up to two. I would love to put that up to 2 times per week. That may start in May. We'll see. But yeah, currently once per week. Now, if it's a bad time for you, I know a lot of folks are in other time zones. You can, all my streams are recorded. So you can rewatch them anytime. You can watch the VODs. You can head over to my YouTube channel where I have my entire archive. I'm going to be uploading a much more next weekend. So it's all there for you if you want to watch them. Narishka says, if we make this box disabled, does that not send it to the back end? Bingo. Yeah. So if you disable a form input box so that folks can't use it, not only does that disable it for the user, it actually disables it for the form itself, and it will not get sent in the payload to the back end. Oh, no worries, Rekrun. Thanks for stopping in. So the way around it now, and the only reason I'm pausing on this is because I made that exact mistake. I forgot that that's a thing. I said, oh, well, I still want to show the value, but I just don't want people to be able to touch it. Fine. So I just disabled the form, and then my updates kept failing. I was like, what is going on? Why am I getting errors from the database? And so I finally console logged the ID on my update request, and it was undefined. And I'm like, what? Why is this undefined? Why isn't it coming in? And then I kept console logging various points, and finally I realized it wasn't even being sent in the form payload at all because I set the input box to disabled. Yeah. So those are just those kind of things we talked about before, right? If you start using more frameworks, you start getting more abstract, you forget basic stuff like that, and you make a mistake and you got to go back and remind yourself, hey, that's not how forms work. And so I had to Google that one. I couldn't remember what to do, and instead I just made it read only. So you can still see it, but you can't edit. Mav627 says, this is awesome. Can't wait until I'm able to watch the video from the last stream to start this. Yeah. And you can always do !project for a link to the repo where all this code is stored, the finished product. And you can look at the commit history to if you just want to build the read-only version, you can go back to the last commit and see the read-only version. And then the next commit is the version with authentication and updates. So however you want to, slice that pie, it's up to you. Nurishka says, I would 1,000% make that mistake. Actually, I just did. Yeah. It's such an easy thing. And it's kind of funny how that works, right? But just use the read-only property instead, and then you'll be fine. Now, you might say, well, why bother with that at all? Why wouldn't you just list the memorial ID as text? And really, this is just a time saver on my part. So you'll see in a minute how I'm generating this, and then it'll probably make more sense. So let's keep going with our form. So get update record is our form. The method again is going to be get because we're getting a record. Get. And then, and then we're going to have a label, and we're just going to have an input. And we're going to have a button for submit. Okay. And we can just call this, I think I'll just call this input box memorial ID because that's what we're searching for. Get some descriptive text. Now, I'm going to be searching in my input box. I'm going to be searching for an ID value. So what should I do to improve my input box? We kind of talked about this before when we talk about protecting our data. What should I do to help to help improve the quality of the inputs that I'm going to get? Because users, they are going to be, some of them are going to be slamming the keyboard with their face because there's no, users have no filter as far as the types of things that they will try to type into input boxes. You should never trust the users to self-validate. So what should I do to make my input box better? Slarwise, thank you so much for the follow, and Inamori, thank you for the follow as well. How can I make my input box better if I'm searching for an ID value? And as a reminder, I'll give you a reminder about what those ID values look like. Do this. So this is the memorial ID value here. Yeah. Narishka has some good ideas. Yeah, Renit's placeholders are good. Yes. And I actually might add one to this so that folks are clear on what a memorial ID is. But yeah, we should probably, at the very minimum, we should make the input type number. That'll help with a lot of things because that way they can't try to type in a name. Maybe they didn't read. Users aren't going to read. They're just going to type whatever they think is right. And so in this case, we're going to prevent them from doing things like typing a name, right? That'll help at least filter out some of the bad inputs. And we could also do things like a max length, min length, things like what number should it start with, all that sort of thing. For now, we're just going to set it as number. But yeah, and a placeholder value would be good as well. I need to get more familiar with the structure of those IDs before I add a placeholder, but I probably will do that. Hey, Root Felon, welcome. Chaotic Rage says type number. Yep, exactly, just like this. So that'll help with some of the bad inputs anyway. And then below the search form, I'm going to have the results. And on our main page, if you look at the repo, on our main page, we kind of did a table type thing, right? Because we're going to get multiple records. We have our table headers, and then we're looping through our results set to display, 100, 200, 300 records, however many we need to. However, in the case of our update page, we're always only going to want one record. Well, I already know we're only going to get one record returned. Because the memorial ID is only going to be a one-to-one relationship with a single record, or it's going to be nothing. Like they put in the wrong ID, so it's either going to be a record or nothing. Those are the two options. So in our search results, I essentially just want to check for those two things. I'm going to say, and again, I'm using EJS format here. So EJS is going to wrap things in these, carets and percent signs. That's EJS syntax. So I'm going to say, hey, if we got a record, a single record, if we got a record, then do something. Then I'll close this if statement. And we'll fill that in just a second. If we got a record, then do something. However, if we didn't get a record, if that search failed, then we're going to essentially send back a message instead, something from the database, like, couldn't find this record or whatever. So we can just say, if there was a record, do something, do the thing. Else, if we got a message back from the database, like, hey, this doesn't match anything in the database, then we want to print that message. We'll just have a paragraph tag with the message inside of it. And the cool thing about EJS is that you can store those types of things in variables and then just put them in tags like this. So whatever message gets sent back from the database, we're going to print it in a paragraph tag. And then otherwise, just the final catch is set essentially. If it doesn't meet those criteria, either of those criteria, then we'll just say else, give a generic sort of, you know, please do something. Enter a valid ID to search for a record, something like that. So we're essentially keeping track of all possibilities here, right? Anything that could happen. Either they get a record, or we get a message back from the database instead of a record, or maybe they just haven't searched for anything at all yet. Okay, so if we do get a record back, what do we want to do? If we get a record back, based on the finished product here, if we get a record back from the database, what should we do? What do we want to what do we want to generate here? Whoa! Domasi, thank you so much for the subscription. Gosh.
Just subscribed with Prime.
Thank you, thank you. That's very kind of you. You get the special subscriber screen. You're very cool. Thank you. I hope you're having a good day. And you subscribed with Prime, so it didn't cost you anything. I love it when people do that. If you're going to subscribe, I never ask for subscriptions, but if you're going to subscribe, please, if you're an Amazon Prime subscriber, use your Prime subscription. It comes free with your Prime subscription. Um, and you can do that once per month for your favorite creator. It doesn't have to be me. Anybody that you enjoy on Twitch, please use your Prime sub on them once per month, because it's just benefit for the Twitch creator, and it's no cost to you or additional cost to you, and it costs Jeff Bezos money. So anything that costs Jeff Bezos money, I am in full support of. So we're trying to make him, spend so much of his Twitch money that he has to sell his stupid cowboy hat. Yeah, Nurishka says we want to generate a form with values in them. Yeah, essentially. We want to generate a form with input boxes with the values of those input boxes populated by the result from the database. Oh, no worries, Quad Shot. I never, hey, attendance is always optional. That's why I record these streams, because that way I want folks to be able to come back and watch them later. So anybody that needs to dip out or, do other things, there's never any guilt, associated with that. Never feel guilty about that. Go and live your life. Do whatever you got to do. As I mentioned this at the start, friends and family, like, it's a holiday today. So if you should be spending time with friends and family, then please go do that. Leave immediately. Go do that. Oh, thank you, Damasi. Oh, you've never heard of EJS? Yeah, a lot of folks, if you started learning with something like React, you might have just skipped over these sort of frameworks entirely. But I think they're good to learn and use, because sometimes something like React is, or Next.js is overkill. Like, it's not always the right tool for the job. Sometimes you just want a very simple application built with mostly HTML and then just a little sprinkling of interactivity. And that's basically what we're doing here. We don't need a ton of interactivity. We don't need, fast refreshes or anything like that. We just need a very plain application with some dynamic content, but not a ton. And so EJS is really good for that. Oh, thank you, Copper Lily. That's sweet of you. Yeah, so essentially what we're doing here is we're creating a form, we're populating with data, we're populating those input boxes with data and also labels, right? So how are we doing that? Well, we're getting a record back from the database, and what we should assume is that record contains, essentially, it's an object, and it's going to contain key value pairs, where the key value is the field name, and then the value itself is what's in that field. So for that record, the first name value is going to the first name is going to be the key, and then actually that person's first name, like Dolores, is going to be the value. So it should be pretty easy to get in there and pull that information out. We all know how to navigate inside of an object, right? You can look at the key, or you can look at the value, or you can look at both. So how can I take an object and quickly and easily loop through it? Now, in this case, I do know how many key value pairs my object is going to have, because it's going to be however many are in the database. So I could do a for loop if I wanted. But what's an easier way to do it? Remember, I'm working with an object here. So specifically for objects, what can I do? And by for loop, I mean, for I plus plus, whatever. But if I'm working with an object, what can I do? Yeah, yeah. Domasi says filter by memorial ID. We don't need to do the filter on the client side. We're going to do that with SQL in our server. So no need to filter. I know for a fact I'm only going to be getting one single record back from this search. No matter what they look for, only one record. So no filters needed. On our server, we're going to be filtering and making sure that we only get one record back. But if I'm working with an object, I can do a very special type of for loop where I just do this. I don't need to do, I plus plus, length, whatever. I can just say for let field and record. It's kind of like a for each, but it's specific. This syntax is specific to objects. So for each key in our object, I'm going to loop through them, as many keys as we have. For each key, or key value pair, sorry, for each key value pair in our record object, I can loop through it and do something. All right, so inside for each key value pair in our object, I essentially want to do two things. I want to generate a label that has the field name, and I want to generate an input box that contains the value. No worries, Quadshot. Quadshot says, I missed some of part one. Are there optional fields to enter physical data like GPS coordinates, dimensions, directional, remember items observed like cones? So there is a notes field and there is a veteran field. So if they're a veteran, you can mark that can be marked as yes, and that's noted in the database. There's also a notes field if you wanted to say like, please leave flowers or something like that. There's a field for that. As far as GPS coordinates, this is just for one graveyard. So if you want stuff like that, you can go to Find a Grave. Like if you want like a national database of graves, you can go to something like Find a Grave for stuff like that. But this is just for a single graveyard with about 4,000 4,000 people interred in it. It's a very local sort of a tool. Basically, what I'm putting in here is data that has literally been captured manually by historians at the library for this very specific local graveyard. So it's manually captured data. So I really only have the fields that they have decided to capture. And so, it's sort of, I'm sort of at the behest of the data that they chose to record. But yeah, findagrave.com is great for more national type, localized searches like that. No worries, Quadshot. That's perfectly fine. All right, so for each key value pair in our object, first I want to generate a label, and then I want to generate an input. Now, again, the label value should contain the key name, and the value should contain the value of that key value pair. So, and also, we also need to, so we'll do this first. I'm going to set, all right, so the value that's going to be displayed to the user is going to be the field name. And Quadshot, I'll read your thing in just a second. I just want to finish this first. So that's what's going to be shown is the field name. And also, I'm going to need to pair this label with the input box. But first, I'm going to fill out the input box. So our input here is going to be text. That's fine. The value is going to be, if I want to, let's say, all right, I have an object and I have key value pairs in that object. If I want to access the value component of a key value pair, how do I do that? Remember, my object is called record and my key is called field. So using this information, can anybody tell me how I access the value of that key? Yeah, we could do field.value. You could use dot notation. Well, yeah, we could use dot notation potentially, but I would prefer in this case to use, yes, Narishka says record value. Close. The way we're going to do it is like this. Yeah, you're on the right track though. I think the thing that makes the most sense here is, and we'll talk about why in just a second, this, using array notation. You can use array notation in objects. And essentially what we're doing here is we're saying, all right, go into the object, and then whatever the index is for that field, then fetch that record. So inside of an object, we start at index 0. So the key value pair at index 0 is like the memorial ID, and then the value at index 1 is the like the last name, value at index 2 is the first name, et cetera, et cetera. So as we're looping through each field, it's going to say, all right, get the value in record at index whatever this field is. Yeah. So as we're looping, we can retrieve the value at this particular index. Now, if you're not familiar with array notation, this is a little confusing, but essentially the way that our EJS is going to read it is something like this. So looping through record, what's the value at index 0? Well, it's memorial ID. What's the value at index 1? 2, 3, whatever. And you can practice this yourself. You can, hard code these values if you want and see what happens. It'll retrieve, the same thing for every loop, but you can still test it. Or you could even do this in the console too. You could do like or you could, just output it in like a paragraph. You could say, record 0, record 1, record 2, and see what that prints. All right, so the value by default is going to be whatever is at this particular location. NeetCoder says, can you use this notation in JavaScript? Record followed by field? I don't know. We could test it. Of course, I want to make sure that this works first. I've never seen it like that. I'm curious. Does anybody else know? Can you do it backwards like that? Can you put the brackets around the other one? I'm going to say no, but I don't know without testing it. I've literally never seen that before. What language does that? NeetCoder, is there a particular language that does it that way? I mean, just gut feeling, I'm going to say no. But is there a particular language that does that? Oh, C does that. Okay. So yeah, JavaScript is C syntax, but it's not. It's just kind of similar. It's like Australian English versus British English. There's some definite differences there. Okay, good to know. Glad to know that C does that. Yeah, some of the differences between these languages are just completely arbitrary and kind of funny. So the name of this is just going to be whatever the field value is, and same with the ID. It's also going to be whatever the field value is. And so that means that my label also has to be set to the field value. So for example, if we do a quick inspect here, and I look at the list of input boxes, we can see that each one has a name set to whatever the database name is. So let's see, can't really see that. Each one is being generated with a name and ID set to the name and ID in the database. Umbrio Gaming, Winbra, thank you. Digital Driver, thank you so much for the follows, folks. I appreciate it. Now, why wouldn't I just hard code these? Why do I want to make sure that the name and ID of my fields line up exactly with their name in the database? What's a reason that I might want to do that? Why might I want to make sure that the input box's name, particularly the name, why would I want to make sure that the input box's name aligns with its name in the database? What's a reason why I might want to do that? Think about what I'm actually doing with this form. Yeah, it's easier to maintain, certainly. Think about what I'm doing with this form. Yeah, Renitz, exactly. So it knows what to update. Because essentially what you're going to see me do is take the output of this form and literally just chuck it back into the database. Since I set the name of each of the input boxes equal to the name field in the database, remember we talked about this before. What happens when you submit a form? It wraps everything up into a what? When you click submit on a form, what is it? It wraps everything up into a what? Yeah, Morpheus, exactly. It puts everything into an object. And since I kept the name of all the fields exactly the same as the way they came out of the database, I can literally just take that object and shove it right back into the database. And you'll see on the back end, this is just incredibly simple because all the fields are there and they already have the right names. So I can literally take that object and just go boop and put it back. Domasi says, is there a particular reason why you're naming your ID front back with underscore? Oh, you're talking about this? Yeah, this is really just the label text. Yeah, this is really just the label text. I am planning on modifying this to be better and not just be the raw database name, because the text that you're showing the user does not have to match the name on your input box or anything like that, right? The name that the stuff you're showing the user does not have to match the name you're assigning behind the scenes. This is more of just an ease of operations for me at the moment, but I am going to make it so these are actually like looking better without the underscores and the lowercase. For now, I'm just writing the raw name from the database because it's more about testing the functionality, but I am going to, obviously improve the user experience here quite a bit, put things on separate lines, give them better formatting and not make it so gross looking. But that's more of a user experience thing. Hope that answered your question. But for now, it's just easier to do. Okay, so we've got this. It's generating the label. It's generating the input box. The last thing I need to do is what we talked about before. So I want a very specific attribute to only be applied to the memorial ID field. So for this particular field, right, I don't want them to edit it because this is my unique identifier. So no touchy for them. They shouldn't be able to touch it. They should be able to see it, but not touch. So I can't type, I can't delete, I can't do anything. So I need to do a special check and say, hey, if the name of the input box is equal to memorial ID, then add the specific attribute. Else, for any other one, they should be able to update. Fortunately, this is pretty easy to do. I can just say inside of my input box tag here, I can just enter this here. And actually, now I'm going to do this. I can just say, hey, if the field name is equal to memorial ID, then add the read only attribute and set it to, well, read only. Otherwise, just leave it blank. Now, what is this? What is this that I've done here? What is this called? Oh, and I accidentally got rid of my close bracket there. There we go. Demasi says short if else. Yes, it is. That's true. It's a one line version of an if else statement, correct? But as Renit said, it's actually called a ternary operator. This is a very specific type of if else comparison. And essentially, what we're doing here is we're saying, all right, do a check. This will be either true or false. Is it true or false? If it's true, do this. If it's false, so this is like my else, then do this. Now, ternary operators do match the behavior of an if else statement, but they are a little different. So if you're using a ternary, you might want to, if you're not familiar with ternaries until now, maybe just read the documentation on them. They do have a little bit of different behavior than if else's, and there's nothing wrong with using if else statements. But in this case, because I'm working in EJS and I'm working in tags and that kind of thing, being able to do this on one line is very convenient. I definitely prefer this rather than an if else statement in this case. All right, and then the last thing for my form is I want a button, and it's just going to be a type of submit. And update this record. It should be what the button says. Domasi says, but you're not checking the real value, only a string. Yes, because I only care about the field name. I don't care what value's in the field. I just want to add the read-only tag to that input field. I don't care what's in it. Regardless of what's in it, it needs that read-only attribute for every single, I want to check every single field name. And for the one that is Memorial ID, I don't care what the value is. I only care about the name and that it has read-only attributes. I just don't want somebody typing in the box. That make sense? And if something doesn't make sense, you're allowed to say so too. I like to mention that too. It's okay to not understand something. If you do, if you don't understand something, that means probably some other people don't as well. And so usually only one person is brave enough to ask. All right, so that should be all we need there. We're essentially just gonna, generate all those input boxes for all the fields in the record. For the one that has the name of Memorial ID, then we want to add the read-only attribute. Otherwise, just let them type in it. Give them all labels. Yeah. So we should be good to go there, I think. Save that. Now that we've done this configuration on the oh, did I not? Oh, I didn't put it in a form. I'm a dingus. Yeah. Good catch. This should also be in a form. Hopefully you saw that if you looked at the repo, but yes, this should all be in a form. Because we want to submit all this data together as an object, right back up to the database. And we're going to have that form go on path update record. Record. See, Copper Lily, you knew you were going to catch me in a mistake eventually. It always happens without fail. I'm old reliable as far as that goes. Ah, Damasi, that's a great question. I love that you asked that question. They said, sure, I missed the requirements a bit. Not sure if this extension would make sense as I don't know the requirements. Can we just set it on the HTML level, read only, instead of doing a check in JavaScript? Good question. All right, so let's think about how that would work. What would happen if we did that? So what happens when I get data back from the database? It's going to loop through all the records on that database, all the fields in that database. And for each of those, it's going to generate an input box, right? So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So it's going to generate 15 input boxes. Now, what am I doing here? I'm looping through all the fields in the record, And for each of those, I'm generating an input box, essentially. So let's think about that. What if I didn't do this check in JavaScript? What if I just said, all right, on my input box here, I want to add read only equals read only. Just copy this. What would that do? What would that do if I did that? Ah, it would make everything read only, right? Yep, all inputs would be read only. Now, I could, skip the memorial ID in the loop and I could hard code a specific input field for that only, but that's extra work. That would be like several more lines. And really, why do that when I could just make a condition in the loop to check for that name? No update, only read. Yeah, exactly. No take, only throw. No update, only read. No touchy. Yeah. Unemployed Dev says, like disabled? Well, actually, before you joined, we actually talked about this, and I'm happy to talk about it again, so don't feel bad. Disabled has very specific properties. If you apply disabled to an input box, it disables it to stop the user from using it, right? But it also stops the form from reading it when you go to submit it and send it back up to the server. So I only know this because I tried it and I was so confused why my form wasn't working, why I couldn't update in the database. I was double checking everything, I was console logging, and it kept my ID value kept coming back as undefined. And I was, from the server, and I was like, what the frick? Like, why isn't this working? And it's because disabled not only makes it so the user can't use it, it also makes it so it doesn't get sent when you submit the form. So I need this value, this memorial ID value, to get sent back up to the server because that's my unique identifier for updating the record in the database. So I need that. And so the way to do that is, instead of making it disabled, you just add the read only property and make it read only so that they can't touch. Okay? Yeah, and yeah, it's one of those things, like I made the mistake and it was just like, what the heck? And I had to Google it to remember what I was supposed to do instead. And you can get around that too if you wanted, by like pulling down the ID twice and having one of them be disabled and then have the other one just not visible, and then sending that back up as the ID. But why do that when you can just, apply the right attribute? Because I think I've done the other way before. I've done it like where you pull the ID twice, one of them's disabled so you can't see it, and the other one is hidden, and then you send it back up to the server, the visible one, or the hidden visible one, back up to the server instead. But this is much easier using the read only property. Yeah. No user generated data, no problems, sort of. Yeah. So my day job is, I'm a BI database engineer, and yeah, sometimes I think that way. More, oh, if only we didn't let the users touch things. Wouldn't that be nice? If Mostly if we just didn't let users have emojis. Yeah, if just nobody was allowed to use emojis ever again, that would make my life a lot easier, I think. All right. So we have our inputs, we have our submit. So I think we're good on the client side. So we're able to take in whatever value we get back from the database, and we're able to put those into a series of input boxes, and then we're able to submit the updates back up to the database. So client side is set. Now let's configure our server to get the data and then update the data. So with that in mind, let me go back to the page here. With that in mind, what type of things am I going to need to add to my server? Remember, we already have the ability to return home. We already have a logout function. We already have the ability to display this page. So what things am I going to need to add to my server? I'm going to need to essentially add 2 more routes. What are those going to be? Conceptually, what are they going to do? Based on, what you see here on the page. What routes am I going to need to add? I'm going to hydrate. Mhm. Domasi said, post send object. Yeah, we're going to need a post, right, to do the update. What else are we going to need? Update and one more. What's the other one going to be? Think about the order of operations. If I'm a user and I go to this page, actually, and we'll see if I can even, might have to log in again if I want to do this. But if I'm a user, what's my order of operations for using the page? What am I going to do as a user? Renee says, "Did you already add the logout route?" Yes, I did. So I've got these routes already. So we'll start. I'll be a user. Okay, I'll be a user. So I'm going to go to update and don't keep track of these yet. I'm going to log in and I'm going to act like a user when I go to this page. Okay, so I'm a user. I've just gotten to the page. Forget about these buttons. We've already got routes for these up here. So forget about those. What's my order of operations? What do I do? Yeah, Chaotic says we're going to need to do the search first, right? So that search is going to be a get, and we're going to need to query the database for a specific record, right? So that's the first thing we need to do. First route we're going to add is this search to hit the database and then return the record in here. And then the second route we're going to need to add is the one to actually then go back to the database and update the existing record. Okay? So, two things: the search to get these values, and then the second to actually do the update. All right, so I'm heading back to my server. I'm going to go down here, past my display, past my login, past my logout. This is the search for the main page. So I'm going to go down underneath that. This next search is going to be less complicated just because it's really just looking up one parameter. Instead of multiple possible parameters, it's just one memorial ID, and we're only going to get back one record. So this is going to be a simpler search. But I can copy some of the information. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say, all right, this is going to be a get for the search, and it's just going to be on path get update record. Get update record, and it's going to be an async function again because we're talking to a database, right? Always want async when we're talking to a database. And I want to make sure I'm just grabbing so the form is going to be sent up. It's going to have that memorial ID record, and I'm just going to store it in a variable. So I can say memorial ID is going to be equal to the value that we're getting from the form, rec.query.memorial ID. So we're just going to store that in a variable. And now I can define my query. So again, I can copy some of this from my other query because I'm grabbing all the same fields. So I can just say let query equals Supabase and copy and paste all that stuff. So essentially we're just saying we're calling on Supabase and we're going to use the Supabase methods to query the database. So from my table, which is called grave register, I'm going to select all the fields that I want. It's not necessarily all the fields. The user doesn't need to see all the fields, like, certain ID values or dates or whatever, the update dates, like database style stuff. They don't need to see all the fields. These are the only fields they're going to care about. And I want them in a specific order. And then I want to filter those results. So somebody mentioned a filter before. Yes, I do want to filter those results, but I don't want to do it on the client side because I don't want to send a bunch of extra data to the client that I'm not going to use. Why would I bother with that when I can control what I get back from the database? And this is where SQL is so valuable because it lets you control that. You can filter on the data you get back directly from the database rather than sending it to the client and filtering there. No worries, Sloops. Thanks for coming in. Yeah, Neat Coder says, well, using ID, you can make user select none. Yeah, so there's other ways you could do it. You could use CSS to control that as well. I think I'm happy using the attributes that are built into the input box itself, but there's other ways you could do it. Yeah. Thanks for coming, Sloop. Hey, Alistios, welcome to the stream. Good to have you here. Hope you're having a good day. So I'm going to select these fields, and then I'm going to filter by saying I want only the value that equals memorial ID field and the value of memorial ID that we're passing in. So essentially what I'm doing here is if you're familiar with SQL, the query would look something like this. Select these fields from grave register where memorial ID equals this value. And since I know that memorial ID is distinct, meaning they're unique, they're distinct, I am only ever going to get back one record. Okay. Alistios, thank you for the follow. BTW, thank you for the follow. Umbrio, Rinbra, sorry. Thank you for the follows, everybody. I appreciate it. So I'm going to get back one record from this query. And all I've done so far is just define the query, right? I'm just writing the query and I'm storing it in this variable. So I haven't executed it yet. I've just defined it. And I'm storing it in this variable. So keep that in mind, okay? And then I'm going to actually execute it down here. I'm going to say let data error equals await query. So this is where the actual execution is taking place. I'm defining it here. I'm storing it in this variable called query. And then in my try catch block, I'm executing it. And I'm either going to get some data or I'm going to get an error, one of the two. Now, if there's an error, I want to throw it because that's going to trigger my catch block. Okay. But if there's data, then I can use that data. So I'm going to say let data, and I'll talk about this and why I'm doing this in a second, but let data object equals data 0. So whenever you get something back from a Supabase query, it's going to be an array of objects. Because again, we're querying a table. And that table has multiple rows and multiple columns. So if I get multiple rows back from my query, those are the values in the array. Each of those array values is an object that's essentially all the column names and values in that row in the table. So for example, I'll give a visual representation here. Let's go to table editor. We'll look at the table again. So if I do a query that returns, say, these first 3 rows, each of these rows, 1, 2, 3, are going to be entries in an array. So it's going to be an array of 3 values. And each of those values is going to be an object that contains each of the key value pairs representing a column and a value. So it's going to be an array of 3 objects. And each of those objects is going to contain all the columns and their value in that row. Okay, now in this case, I know that I'm only getting back one record because Memorial ID is unique. So I know I'm only going to be getting back one record. But regardless of that, Supabase is still going to wrap it in an array. So it's going to be an array of one value, which is one object. And essentially all I'm doing here with this piece of code is I'm saying just get rid of the array, just go in here and pull out the object and assign it into this variable called data object. So get rid of the array brackets, just grab the single value that I know is in there and put it into this variable called data object. So what's going to be stored in here is literally just an object. And we can see that, the format is going to look like this. So data object is just going to be an object, no longer wrapped in an array, and that's what I want to send back to the client. Just want to get rid of those brackets. So that's all I'm doing there. Oh, good point. Yeah, I left a memorial ID out of my select statement accidentally. Good catch. I have it in the repo. I just didn't put it here. So yes, we definitely need that. Actually, I'm just going to copy what I have in the repos to make sure I get it right. I think that's the only difference is, yeah, that's fine. Good catch. All right, so now I have an object stored here. And to do EQ, data 0. All right, cool. So now what I can do is I can say, all right, if we actually got a record back from the database, that means data object is going to have something in it. And so if it has something in it, I want to just send that record to the client and have the client render it out. If we didn't get something back from the database, if they, misspelled something or whatever, I want to show the user a message to say, hey, you screwed up, please try again. I don't want it to error out. I just wanted to show them a message saying, hey, please try again. So I want to just handle that if we didn't get anything back. Narishka says, shouldn't the query be like an arrow function, so we invoke it later? In this form, aren't we invoking it 2 times? No. And that's a reasonable question. This actually tripped up a lot of people in the last stream. In the previous stream, we probably spent like 30 minutes talking about this, which is, it's totally fine. It's confusing if you haven't done this before. All we're doing here is just a definition. We aren't invoking anything. We're just defining it. And we're storing it in this variable. Right here is where the magic happens. This is where we're actually executing the query. And then, in our try catch block is where we're actually executing it. We're just defining it here. Alistio says, is it like defining a variable? Well, it literally is. Yeah, that's what we're doing. We're defining a variable, and we're just setting up some Supabase methods that we're going to call. And we're saying, this is what we want to do. We're not doing it yet. We're not doing it yet. We're just setting it up. Okay? We're not doing it yet. We're just setting it up. And here we're saying, all right, from my table called grave register, I want to get these columns, but only where, or sorry, these records with these fields, but only where the memorial ID is equal to whatever value we passed in. So one record will be returned when we execute it here. No worries, Damasi. Thanks for coming in. All right. So I know it's confusing, but yeah, that's essentially what we're doing. We're just setting this up and then executing it here. Narishka, you're not the only one. You're not the only one, but no, it works perfectly fine like this. You can check the Supabase documentation too. It's very similar to how we would do it with MongoDB as well. If you use MongoDB, it works in a similar way. Really, the await is what's doing it. The await is what's setting it off. We're saying, hey, do something and wait till it's finished. We're essentially setting up a promise here. Await is just a promise. And so we're just saying, hey, wait on this to be done and do the thing. And if we got something back, then do other things, essentially. No worries, Alistios. Super new to programming, playing around with Godot and making games. Oh, that's awesome. But definitely interested in learning new stuff. I'll sit back and watch. No, feel free to ask questions. If you have questions, I always say on my stream, there's no such thing as a stupid question. I don't even like that term because every question is valid. Excuse me. If it helps your understanding. I just got a tickle in my throat. Give me just a sec. Whew. Ah. Okay, I think we're good. So yeah, every question is valid if it helps your understanding. All right, so we're getting one record back. If we get something back, so if we get an error back, then we would just want to throw that error, and it's going to go down to the catch block and execute our catch block. But if we did get something, we're going to take it out of that array and store it as an object. And then we're going to say, all right, if we didn't get an error and we got something back, so if there's something in this object, then we want to res.render our update page. And I want to pass that record back down to the client. And that's what's going to allow our client to take this record object, loop through it, and get all the fields and all the input boxes. Now, if we didn't get an error, but data object is empty, if we didn't get an error, but the object is empty, that means it was a valid query, but there was nothing matching that record. Like they put in the wrong ID, they fat fingered it, whatever. So instead, we still want to render the update page, but we just want to give them a nice message that says, hey, you screwed up, please try again. So the value of record is going to be null, but instead we can actually send down a message that says, hey, no record found, please try again. Because if you remember, on our client side, we have some specific logic for that. So on our client side, we're essentially saying, hey, if there's a record, then display that record. However, if there's not a record, then show the message. So it's really one or the other. So if there's a record, we show the record or send the record. If there's nothing to display, then we set record to null, which triggers that message property and shows that instead. Okay? Elistio says, like, I understand you're working on a database and what they are, but I'm having a hard time with anything server related. Yeah, that's very fair. Servers are hard until you start to see the patterns. And seeing the patterns really only comes with practice after you've built a few servers. Let's see. Having a hard time with any server related, client versus server, talking to each other and knowing how to know which script does what sure is complex. Yeah, absolutely. It 100% is. No worries, Trive. Thanks for stopping in. Go get some food. Yeah. So Alistios, yeah, again, the best way to get more comfortable with servers is practicing, but I know that practicing can be hard when servers just feel really complex. On my YouTube channel, if you want to get more practice with servers, I would suggest, let me think about some good ones. Oh, yeah, a really good one that should hopefully be fun is a recent one I did. I think, do I have it on my channel yet already? One second. I'm going to go, so I'll head to my YouTube channel here. And go to videos. Did I move it to my channel yet? I haven't moved to my channel yet. It's still private, but let's see, what's a good one? Actually, a lot of my recent videos would probably be good for this. A lot of them are full stack. Oh, this one might be a good one. Making this template full stack. It's a very simple full stack application. Yeah, very simple full stack application, very simple server. Another one that you should look out for that I think would really be helpful for you because it's a very simple server, doing simple, CRUD operations, create, read, update, delete. Actually, I think it's read only, I think. So that might be a great place to start. Would be the Doggo generator. I know it sounds weird, but there'll be a video out pretty soon where I'm refactoring some old code of mine for a very simple project called the Doggo Generator, which is a like a read-only server. It just uses an external API, and it's a fun, simple server project. So that might be a good one to look at. Another good one. Oh yeah, here's another one. Facebook for cats. That's a good one too. Facebook for cats. Um, also this one here. Let's review MVC structure and full stack development. That's another good one. Thinking about simple full stack projects that aren't going to be too crazy. And also this one right here. Wait, no, not that one. MVC. This other one here. Let's practice MVC. That's another good one. So plenty of options. Feel free to take your pick. Also, my YouTube channel is entirely ad free, so you can watch at your own pace without annoying ads because ads suck. So, all right, cool. Uh, Bombo says, "Hey, can anyone here tell me how to see a Twitch channel VODs when they're live?" Yeah, so you can click on the I'm on desktop using Firefox. Yeah, so if you are on Twitch right now, you can, I believe, click on there's either tabs underneath the video, or if you click on the actual channel name like Mine Wolf, um, it'll take you there's going to be some tabs somewhere, and one of them is videos, and you can click on that. You can literally see the stream that's live right now. You can rewind it and watch it. You can rewind it and watch it from the beginning while we're live. Okay, Alistio says, would you say that server logic is similar, whatever the language you use? I'm also working on creating a small Roblox game that requires scripting in a different language, but I'm sure the logic must be similar. Yeah, so servers generally operate with 4 properties: create, read, update, and delete. Those are really the 4 main actions that you're going to be doing on your data. So the implementation might be different, but if you think about the actions in those terms, create, read, update, delete, or often abbreviated as CRUD, that might make it a little simpler for you to think about. Okay, which of these 4 actions do I need to do? Am I creating? Am I reading? Am I updating? Am I deleting? Yeah, overall, your logic is going to be similar. It doesn't really matter what language you start with. You'll be able to kind of translate that into other languages as you learn. Yeah. Oh, good, Bombaloni. I'm glad you found it. Great. All right, let's get back to the code. So essentially what we're doing here is we're saying, all right, if we got a record back from the database, render the update page and with that object in it. Otherwise, give them a message that says, hey, didn't find anything, and it's going to show that message on the client page. And I think I have an extra parenthesis somewhere. That always happens. Always, always, without fail. Extra parenthesis. Oh, I think my extra parenthesis is there. Oh, I think it's here. Oh, is it? Try. No, that's my try block. That. Okay. Gotta play hunt the parenthesis. Give me a sec. This happens a lot as well. Oh, I'm missing my catch block. That's why. That's why it doesn't like it, because I'm missing my catch block. So we want to catch that error, and we want to show it. If we get an error, we want to show it in the console. We'll show the error message. And log it. There. Okay. No more red squigglies. Cool. All right. I think, let me check my routes here. So, okay. So first thing we're doing here is we are just doing the search, right? So in the terms of our client, all we're doing is saying, all right, I want to search for the record. And then we're sending it back down to the client and we're populating each of these input boxes. So we've gotten this far. But now we need to actually write the update that's going to send all these records back to the database and fill everything in. So that's what we're going to do now, is our actual update function. So we've gotten the record. Now we need to actually write it back. Alistio says, do you need to add extra code if you want your query to be more broad, not case sensitive, or able to search partially? Yeah, so that's a great question. If you look in the repo, and you can do !project right now to see the finished code in the repo. Check inside of the check in the server. Look at the search route. So on the search route, we're doing a more complex query. So we're doing things like looking for partial matches. Let's say like they're searching for the person's last name, but they don't know the exact spelling. So maybe they only put in the first three letters or the last three letters or the middle three letters. It doesn't really matter. What we're doing is we're adding specific filters to say it's not an exact match. It's literally going to be like that string value. So in SQL, that's something that you can do. So the query language we're using here specifically is SQL to query a relational database, which is Supabase. SQL is the way you interface with it. So we're saying for a value that's like whatever they entered, and the way you trigger that is with these little percent signs. So these mean wildcards. This means you could have other stuff before it and or other stuff after it, as long as that string that they put in is somewhere in the middle. Could be at the beginning, could be at the end, could be in the middle, doesn't matter. Because we're using this like keyword and these wildcard symbols, it could be anywhere in the mix. Yeah, essentially the star star, that's just another way to write a wildcard. So in a lot of scripting language, the star is a wildcard, but in SQL specifically, the percent signs are wildcards. It's just one of those syntax differences. Yeah. Jack Jacker says, hey, mind asking when the next cohort starts? Yeah, so that's a great question too. Some of you might be saying, what do you mean by cohort? Well, I am an instructor for a free web development course called 100 Devs. What it does is if you don't know anything about web development and you'd like to learn, or if you'd like to learn full stack and how to build servers, you can join 100 Devs, and it's completely free. There is never any charge because education should be free. All the classes are online. All the classes are fully accessible. There's a Discord of like several thousand active users, all of whom are helping each other go through the course. All the lessons are currently recorded and available on YouTube. Not my channel, but if you do !100 devs in chat, I changed the command. Sorry, 21. I changed the commands. Yeah, so Muba, there we go. 21 got it. Yeah, so it's right there just above your chat there, Listios. It's 100devs.org/about, and you can join there. Again, it's free to join. There is no barrier to entry. You will get immediate access to the Discord. You'll get immediate access to all of the previous lessons and to a very active community. And we do have live classes as well, although those live classes are not currently running. However, again, all the previous classes are recorded, so you can start learning at any time. Live classes will be starting sometime this summer. I can't say exactly when, just because we've encountered some administrative snags, but you can still watch all the classes from the previous cohort at any point. I would also recommend communitytaught.org. That will help you keep track of all the classes. It gives you links to all the classes. It gives you links to all the homeworks, all the resources, everything that you need. So communitytaught.org is kind of your way of keeping organized. But still, please join the Discord because they're super active. It's a super fun community. I'm there if you want to talk to me there. I'm on that Discord as well, and tons of great people that can help you with any questions. So if you ever want someone to help you figure out how to build a server in JavaScript specifically, or another language too potentially, folks there will be happy to jump on a voice channel or help you with a specific question in the code help channels or anything like that. Yep. No worries, Alistios. Also, the main instructor, Leon, is a super fun dude. The dude has like I've never met a more charismatic individual in my life. So, if you like my teaching style, his is even better. Um, so yeah, I can't wait for you to join us there on the Discord. And yeah, at any point you can ask anybody for help, and somebody will be there to help you. Oh my goodness, Alistios, thank you so much for the sub. You didn't need to do that, but I definitely appreciate that. You get my special subscriber screen. There you go. You're very cool. Thank you for subscribing. I appreciate it. That's very kind of you, Alistios. That's exactly right, Alistios. Knowledge should be free, but hard work should be remunerated. Remunerated, sorry. Yes, knowledge absolutely should be free. That's one of my main philosophies in life. Education should be free. Your time is valuable. Your work is valuable. You, as a person, have worth. And I think that's something that a lot of folks like. You shouldn't have to be working for someone else to get money in order to feel like you have worth. Because you just existing and attempting to better yourself, like that has worth just in itself, outside of any monetary gain. You making yourself better in any way has intrinsic value in itself. So never forget that, anybody. All right, I think we got this done. Okay, so we were working on the actual update function. So where we're actually hitting the database and doing the update. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to have a post route, because when they click that update button, they're going to want to do a post. We're sending that information up, and this app dot post route is going to be listening on the yeah, all right, update record route. Update record. And again, it's going to be asynchronous because we're talking to the database. And again, we haven't done this in a while, but we're actually going to do another check here to make sure that we're authenticated. Because if I'm going to be changing database data, I want to be sure as darn sure that I'm authenticated first. So as a reminder, we set this value earlier when we logged in. So when we logged in, we set this value. Oh, typo. Yep, thank you. When we logged in, we set this value to true. So if they're authenticated, then they're allowed to touch things in the database. If they're not, then I want to immediately take them back to the login page. They aren't allowed to do anything else. They're not even allowed to be on the page still. I'm immediately going to render the login page, and they need to log in first before they can touch anything. Because what could have happened is maybe they were on the update page, they searched for a record, and then they went away and had lunch, right? Well, how do I know it's the same person that's still trying to do that update? I don't want them to finish that action without logging in again. ZZBTW says, isn't it put to update data? Yes. Technically, yes. The keyword, the put method is specifically for updates. But this data is coming from a form. This data is coming from a form. And it's this form right here. Form action, update record. So I'll let you answer this question. Anybody out there in the audience? Why can't I use put? Or why, I should say, why am I not using put? Neatcoder says, I never use put, but why? Why? Yeah, forms by default cannot use the put method. That is just literally how they are defined, how they are designed by whoever built HTML or builds HTML, whatever, whoever sets these standards. There's some symposium or commission out there that does this sort of thing. you literally cannot use a put method from a form. You can try it, but it won't work. Now, there's packages that you can install that allow you to do other methods, in forms and things like that. But technically, the specific method that you're using for your routes doesn't really matter. This could be a get. I mean, I could just send up a form with a get method and pass data in. I mean, that would work too. But for accuracy's sake, we want to use the closest approximation, which in this case is a post. But that's an excellent question. I'm glad you asked it. Um, if we had a different type of a route where let's say I just had a bunch of input boxes that were not in a form, then I could have it be whatever the heck route I want. I could have it be a put, I could have it be a patch or whatever the other ones are that I never use. But since we're working from a form, we're limited by what forms are actually able to do, and they can only do post and get. So the closest approximation here is a post. Yep. Great question though, BTW. Again, I'm glad you asked. All right, so we're checking to see if they're authenticated. If they are, then we'll go ahead and do the update. So in here, I can have my try catch. And in order to make this a little bit less, gnarly in this try catch block, I'm actually going to declare a function to do the update. So we're just going to call it. We're going to say const updated data, and we're going to await a function called update record in Supabase. And we're going to pass into that just the request body. So again, since I'm filling out this form with all the fields that came straight from the database, so I have all the field names that I know are correct, and I have all the values straight from the database, I can just, when they click that update button, I can literally just punt that data right back up without having to do any checks or filtering on it. I can just say, all right, pass the whole request body into this update function, which we're going to define in a minute, and then just execute. Okay. And then assuming that is successful. Oh, and I forgot my throw error statement in here, but I think I had it at one point and I accidentally deleted it. Whoopsie. We'll take care of that in a minute. So if it is successful, then, I mean, we could pass the record value back down. We kind of talked about that before. But instead, for now, I'm just have a message that says record updated successfully. Okay. So they've successfully updated the record. Now, if there's an error, then we can say console. We want to console error that error. And as a reminder, console.error versus console.log, the main difference is that it just it really just makes this red and makes it stand out in the console versus a standard console log. So if there's a problem, I still want to render the update page, but I'm essentially just going to give them a different message. So just say, hey, there was a problem, please try again. And again, if they're not logged in, I don't want to do any of that. I just want to straight up render the login page to make them log in first. Yeah, so web developer, remember, forms literally cannot use put. So yes, I know that REST principles are important, but you literally, if you try, it will not work. So, you still you're just not going to be able to do it no matter what principles you're following. It's literally not built into forms. Now, if you're using an input box that's not in a form, if you're handling the submit via client-side JavaScript, then yeah, you could use put, you could use whatever. But just do keep in mind that's a literal structural limitation of forms, where it's not that just I'm not using it because I don't want to. It's literally that you can't. So forms only allow get and put. Unfortunately, I wish they allowed more, but that's just not in the cards. Yeah, Renitz is a regular viewer here. They are a loyal viewer of my streams, and I very much appreciate that. But I appreciate the shout out, web developer, as well. Yes. Um. Oh, and I screwed that up. Yeah. Thank you for that, Copper Lily. So you caught me again. I love it. I love it when that happens because you're always watching out for me. I absolutely screwed up this console error. I'm just going to copy and paste it because I'm probably going to mess it up again. So two things. The catch block really isn't anything crazy. We're just console erroring the error. I looked at two lines and I merged them together in my brain. So we're console logging the error and we're saying error updating record. And then we're rendering the update page with a specific message for the user. So it's kind of, we're doing two things here. This one is for the developer to see because it's only in the console. And this is the more user friendly message that we want to send to the user to say, hey, something went wrong. Please try again. Because generally we don't want to show users the raw errors that we're getting back from the database because it scares and confuses them. you know you know how when folks and I don't blame them, for this, but you know how when folks get an error in an application, if it's not immediately readable, some folks just freak out. They can't read it. They're just like, I don't know what to do, it's broken. I think we've all seen that. It scares and confuses me too. Yeah. Even if the error is trying to tell you what to do, learning to read error messages is a genuine skill. So learning how to effectively troubleshoot is a skill that not many people have. And so if you're able to do that even at a minimal level, you're going to go far. But still, for our users in general, we want to give them an easier time of it and give them user friendly error messages rather than what comes back from the server or from the database. All right, so this is our update function. Yeah, Morpheus, exactly. I usually have two sets of errors. One is user friendly, the other is for internal use. Exactly. Yes, that's a good thing to do. Okay, so remember, this is the actual action of what we're doing. However, we still need to define this specific function. So again, we're kind of doing like what we did before, where we're going to be defining something first, and then inside of our try catch block is where we're actually executing that thing. Okay. So I need to define this specific function, update record in Supabase. And what I'm passing in there is form data. So all the data from the form, it has all the fields that I need already. And I'm going to pass it in. Sync function. And again, in here, I'm going to have a try catch block. This might be overkill, but it's not going to hurt anything. So I want to catch, if I get an error, I want to catch it. And I'm just going to log this straight to the console because, again, this function is nested. It's not going straight to the client, so I don't need to really make a client-friendly message. So I'm going to console log the error, but then I'm going to rethrow the error so that it's caught in this catch block up here. That's right. That's why I don't need to throw error here, because it's going to actually come out of this function and then get caught by this catch block. So it's kind of a double, it's a nested try catch. So it's okay if you don't understand that. It's just a little sort of a inheritance type dealio. Essentially what's happening is if we get an error, this error is going to be returned by this function. So the output of this function is going to be thrown into the parent and then caught in this catch block. All right, so in our try block here, we're going to say const record. I'm going to declare a new variable called record ID. BRB, it's a long stream. No worries. Yeah, we should have taken a break a little bit ago, but we're so close to being done. So I just kind of want to power through and finish. So feel free to step away for a minute if you need to. So essentially, for actually building the update query, I need to grab the memorial ID and I'm going to store it in a variable. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the object that I'm passing up from the form and I'm going to delete the original value. So we'll pause here for a minute and talk about what I'm doing. First thing I'm doing is I'm capturing that ID value. Oh, memorial ID with an underscore. First thing I'm doing is I'm capturing the ID value and I'm storing it in its own variable. And then I'm going back into the form data and I'm deleting the ID value from the object. Okay, so think about why that might be. And once I build the query, it'll probably make a little bit more sense. So I'm going to go to, and again, this is another thing that I copied straight from the Supabase documentation as far as this query we're about to build. So if you're not sure, like, oh gosh, I don't know how to build queries like that, again, check the Supabase documentation. It's really, really good. It will teach you start to finish how to write these queries. You can literally copy and paste them. So from Grave Register, I want to update essentially all the fields. So I'm going to pass in the entire object from the form. Remember, our form object contains all the fields in the table. So we essentially we have a giant object with a bunch of key value pairs, and I just want to update everything based on what the user entered. I have no idea what the user changed, what they didn't change. It doesn't really matter. I just want to update everything, and the records that the values that didn't change are just going to be the same, and then anything that got updated is going to get updated. But I only want to update the records where the value of memorial ID equals the memorial ID that they looked for. And again, if error, throw error. And we already set up our catch block. Okay, so by looking at this, can anyone tell me why I deleted formdata.memorialID? Why did I do this? First, what I do is I store the memorial ID in its own variable. So that's how I'm doing the update. And then I delete it from the original object. Renate says, so you could put it in the EQ? That's a good guess. But the cool thing about SQL is that I could still have it in my update. And actually, that's sometimes you want to write a query, right? Where you're updating a specific value if it equals something. Let's say I wanted to go into the database and change all month values that are currently January. I want to make them February. So in that case, I would write a query something like await Supabase from table update month EQ month January. So in that case, I would have the field in both places. Yeah, exactly. But I think so 21 and Hot Babe and Narishka are right. We don't want to alter memorial ID in the database. Now we know that the way that we built the input box, the user can't change it. We made it so it's read only, but still, why take that chance? Memorial ID is our unique identifying value. And even if we put it as a key, in the database, we just don't want any chance that it could potentially be changed or made inaccurate or deleted or whatever, gotten rid of, empty string, who knows? So I'm going to delete it from the update object. So that way it doesn't get passed into the update statement, although we can still put it in the equal statement because we already extracted it and stored it in this variable. So we're only deleting it from the initial object that we're putting in the update. However, we still want to preserve it so we can use it in the where clause. Hope that makes sense. So it's just how we're controlling how we want to use it, and we're protecting it from accidentally being changed. Yeah. BTW says, is it a primary key? Technically, yes. I built this database using test data because I didn't know the structure of the actual data I was going to get. I didn't know that Memorial ID was going to be like my unique identifier until like yesterday. So currently, if you look at the table, it's not the primary key. I was generating my own IDs for that. And so eventually it's going to be the primary key, but it isn't currently just because I didn't have the real data until yesterday. So eventually, yes, it will be the primary key, but not at the moment. That's the trouble you run into when you're working with test data without knowing the actual data structure. But it still works either way. The way I've set it up anyway, it's still going to work either way. Okay, so we've got our function that's actually doing the update, and we're doing our execute with await. We're catching errors, and then here we're calling that function to do the update, and then we're rendering out to the client. Either way, either it worked or it didn't. If they're not logged in, we render the login page. So yeah, I think we're good. I think that's everything. Hey, Nomani, welcome. Hope you're having a good day. So how about we see if we can run it? Let's see what I missed. I'm sure I made a spelling error somewhere. So if you want to, anybody's welcome to put bets on whether it's actually going to work. But also, I think I want to define a custom port. I want to say port. We'll set it to port 5. I've already got it set to 5,000. Cool. Good. Web developer says, what if Supabase comes out with v3 of their API and EQ is named to equal? Now you need to change this in multiple places in your code. This is a lot of work and prone to error. Well, the good thing is that EQ is defined by the API. So they're not likely to change something that fundamental. Now, if I was using some kind of obscure esoteric method, then maybe I would be a little bit more concerned. But that EQ method is essentially a where clause in SQL, which is a very fundamental part of every query. So since I'm only using very standard query notation here, I'm really not concerned about that. Changing the fundamental execution of methods in that way, for such standard query parts, really not concerned. Okay. Also, too, if you're following along, if you've been kind of coding along, don't forget you need to set up your environment variables. If you clone down the repo, you will need to pull in your Supabase. Where is it here? Oh, yeah. You'll need to pull in your Supabase URL and your Supabase API key in order for this to work. So don't forget that. Oh, also, too, gosh, there was a question from ages ago. I don't even know if I'm going to be able to find it. It was a question I was going to answer. It was really long from Quad Shot Kung Fu. Oh yeah, they were asking about filters on the searches. They said, I was speaking to capturing data about found items. Also, like say there was a picture of a child left sitting on the headstone, or a penny or a dime left on the headstone. Capture and document those things or whatever is present. Yeah, so Find a Grave actually does that. Um, they have like pictures of the headstone, so it would capture pictures or stones or pennies or things that are set um, on the grave itself. I actually do want to eventually add pictures to this database, so I want to go and like take my own pictures of each of the graves. And have those associated with a specific record. So if somebody's looking for the grave, they'll have both the location, so like the physical location on the map, which is like a section and a lot number, but then they'll also have a picture of the grave so they can spot it a little easier. So yeah, I plan to do that at some point. All right, let's see if we can run this. So I'm going to use my npm start script. Let's see if it fires up. Yep. Okay, so we got a deprecation warning, but that's okay. It's just a warning. Server running on port 5000. Cool. localhost 5000. Hooray! So it runs. That's good. Oh, the other thing I forgot is to actually link to the update page. So I need to change my homepage to actually link to it. Let's do that real quick. Hey Eric, welcome. Hola. ¿Cómo está? And really, that's very simple to do. We could use a button, but in this case, I'm going to use um, just a plain hyperlink because I don't want it to be super visible. So here, let's do that. So really, just all I'm doing is I'm just creating a link to the update page. And remember, if they follow this route, so I'm just going to go back to the update page route here. If they follow this update page route and they are not logged in, it's going to take them to the login page. So I don't need a separate link to the login page. I don't need a separate link to the login page because we're already doing this check on the server side. So if they're already authenticated and they're within that 10-minute time limit, then it's just going to take them straight to the update page. If they're not logged in, it'll take them to the login page, which then redirects to the update page. So either way, they're going to get where they need to go, but we don't need to add a specific button just for that. Okay, so save that. Now if I reload, there we go. I don't have all the styling in place, but that's okay. Alicios asks, question, to join the next cohort, do you need any basic programming skills or it's a from zero course? It is a from zero course. When I started 100 devs 2 years ago, I thought web pages were magic. You could say HTML and I wouldn't know what you were talking about. I was already working with SQL a little bit. You know, I'd just been hired as a SQL dev, but SQL is extremely different than anything web development related. So I was pretty much starting from zero as well. Yeah, you could say CSS, and I'd be like, CS what? So didn't know anything about JavaScript. Didn't really know anything about programming fundamentals. I just knew how to write SQL queries. Um, but a lot of folks did truly start from zero, like no prior programming knowledge, nothing like that. And I mean, now, 2 years later, I'm like, I can build you something in React. I can use pretty much any framework you want. I can build full stack. I can work with MongoDB or Supabase or whatever you want. Um, yeah. So, Elistios, to answer your question, no, you do not need any prior skills. I know you have some, which is fantastic. You'll probably be able to help folks, you'll be able to help folks pick things up, but you do not need any prior skills. Pure Canadian says, give it some more time and you'll be learning other programming languages too. Actually, I already have. So for work, I primarily write SQL, but I'm also now in charge of maintaining our desktop applications, which are .NET. So I've had to learn Visual Basic and I've had to learn C Sharp. So yeah, I do VB and C Sharp now as well, and also some Bash scripting for automation and stuff. So yeah, I mean, once you start to pick up these skills, you can really expand really quickly into other fields and other languages. So you'll be to answer your question, Elistios, you'll be just fine. Don't worry. All right, so let's see if we can update a record. Okay, cool. Oh, apparently I forgot some text in my button. That's fun. I didn't finish my login page properly. Cool. Yeah, I just built the form. I didn't I didn't put any text in the button, and also I didn't put a title. Man, I was not paying attention. All right, login, and then what did I call this? Oh yeah, gotta fix that. So all I'm doing here is I'm just creating a return home button and some text to make it look better. So all this form does is it just calls the homepage route. So it'll render the homepage if they click it, and then this is just straight up tags to give information about the session. So let's reload. There we go. That looks better. Oh, good, Elistios. I'm glad. So now let's see if we can log in. Uh, And again, this is not a real email address, but since we're doing authentication with Supabase, Supabase requires this format for their users. So like you have to have like an email. So I just made one up. It's not real. Okay, great. So we were successfully able to log in. That's excellent. So that means that we validated with Supabase and we were able to create a session. And again, we're storing that session information on the server side. So I know sometimes we've seen where it gets stored in the user side, like as a local cookie. And you could actually even sometimes see that stuff if you go into your inspect and you go into application. You can see like cookies and session storage in here. But if we look inside the session storage, there isn't anything there because we're not storing anything on the client side deliberately. Because again, this is going to be on a public computer and a public kiosk, and I just don't want to do that. I want to store everything on the server side, so it's remote. Um, and then here, we can see a connect SID, but it's obfuscated. So there's nothing that anybody can use. So the only thing we're really storing in the client side is just this Supabase connection SID, which is obfuscated and it's encrypted. So nothing that anybody can get in here and screw with. Web developer says, how to do password reset if someone forgets the password. We would do that on the Supabase side because, again, Supabase is handling authentication. So they could contact whoever, probably me, but at any point, somebody else could own the Supabase database. And they could just log into Supabase and you can reset the user information there. So, because Supabase is handling the authentication. Oh, thank you, Hot Babe. I really like my coworkers. My coworkers are great. I love the team that I'm on currently. Hey, Mr. Friend, welcome. All right, so let's see if we can update an ID. I'm going to do 654321. That's an ID in my test database. Search that. Great. So we've got the ID 653421, all the information. And I'm going to go ahead and change this to test demo. So I'm changing the value of notes and we'll update. Okay, it tells us the record was updated successfully. We can confirm that if we look in the database here. Yeah, so down here at the bottom, let's see, I don't know if that's behind. Can you see that? Yeah, you can. Okay, good. Down here at the bottom, we can see that even in the database, the record has been updated and it gave us the correct message back when we did update that. Now I'm going to try to search for an ID that doesn't exist. So 111 does not exist. And when I do that, it doesn't give me an error. It just says no matching record found. Please check the value and try again. So that's what we expected as well. Perfect. Now I'm going to log out and I'm going to try to do something I shouldn't be allowed to do. I'm going to try to log out. Well, actually, no, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to return home without logging out. So maybe I typed in the wrong memorial ID and I'm like, oh crap, I need to search again and find the right ID and then try again. I want to go back to the update page, but I'm still logged in. So click. And instead of taking me to the login page, because I have an active session, it's going to take me straight to the update page. So the same link can go two different places depending on your authentication status. Now I still have an active session, so this is still going to work. Now when I search, it's valid. I get all the information. So I can do this as many times as I want until I log out. And now if I click the same link again, it's going to take me to the login page. So that routing is working exactly as expected. Okay, now let's say I don't want to log in. I want to just go straight to the update page. So I'm going to manually put in here this path, this update record path. Or maybe I bookmarked it or something. I wasn't paying attention. I bookmarked the wrong page. I just want to go straight there. For one, I don't have a get route for update record, but I need to actually go to update page. Sorry. Yeah, update record is the thing it sent when it sends the actual update request. Update page. Update page is the link to the page. There we go. So when I do that, if I go to update page, again, even manually, it's going to take me to the login. So that's behaving exactly the way I want. It's stopping people from getting where they shouldn't be. And okay, now let's see if I can fudge this. let's see. I can't. The way I have my routing set up, I can't even actually fudge it. I was thinking, wouldn't it be? I would. What I'd like to do is go to the update page and um, let my session expire, and then try to update a record. I will say, you have to trust me on this. I have tried that. I basically logged in, went to the update page, searched for a record, and then waited 20 minutes. I went and had lunch. And then I came back and tried to click update, and it told me, well, it didn't tell me, it just took me right back to the login page. So I can tell you that that does work. I did try it. I don't want to wait 10 minutes. But yeah, so the timeout also works because we explicitly set it on the session. If you try to update some field in your database to script, to add some SQL injection. All right, let's do, we can try that. Yeah, because one thing we aren't really controlling here yet, it's I want to work on it, but is, you know, these are all still set to text fields. Um, I want to add some more checks and stuff on the specific like type of field that they are, like number versus whatever. Um, but for now, they are all a text field. So if we do this, like they said, this is called SQL. This is called, well, it's essentially not necessarily SQL injection in this case, but code injection. Cross-site script. Is it cross-site scripting? No, it's not cross-site scripting. I guess it's just code injection. We'll put it in the notes. Do that. Update. Okay, it's been updated. Yeah. Yeah. So because of the way I'm doing this here, it's not going to hurt anything. Does it look good? No. Should they do it? No. So I can put some regex checks. What I'll probably end up doing is putting some regex checks on these to eliminate special characters, because those can be applied to the same regex check can be applied to every field. So I'll just have it exclude special characters from all the fields. But the way I'm doing this here, the fact that it's just being written as a value into the notes means it's actually not going to render out as HTML. Oh, you want to see it in the search field? Yeah, sure. Yeah. Crap. What was that? Hang on. I need to get the name. This person had again, this is Chat GPT data, but this person had a first name of John, a maiden name of Johnson, and a last name of Smith. So I'll just do this. So even so, still not going to be a problem. Doesn't look good, shouldn't happen, but it's still not going to execute, because the way I'm writing it out, the way I'm parsing it on the client side is it's just plain strings. So everything that's being written into the table is being read in as strings. So not as a script or anything like that. Yep. Yeah, I'm storing it as a string so it won't be executed. Mm-hmm. Good thing to try though. And like I say, on the update field, I'm going to put regex checks to stop special characters. Morpheus says, random question. Do you have any tips on coming up with ideas for a side project? I can get creative when I have constraints. I feel that. Yeah, definitely. That's ADHD for you, in my case, anyway. But not when it's too open ended. Yeah. So for me, like this is an example of a wonderful side project that I'm having a blast doing. And the way it came about was I started volunteering for a local museum, which is run by the library. And I just saw a need. They had this big ass binder of like 4,000 grave records. They have to like flip through. It's huge. It's a thick binder. It's like this. And if you want to find your relative, you got to flip through all these pages, like all these laminated pages, flip, 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 and just hope that everything's in the right order. Um, and I just thought, man, this should be digitized so people can just go to a computer and search for a name without having to, spend 10 minutes flipping through the binder. Because another thing I noticed is that people are interested in the graveyard, but they see the binder and they just don't even like, they're just like, no, I don't have the time. Like, I don't want to do that. They'll like look at the binder and they'll open it and they'll just be like, oh crap, like this is a bunch of really tiny print and I don't want to bother. This is too hard. And they go and look at something else. And so I see that over and over again. And I was like, wouldn't it be great if they could, especially older folks, like they don't want to read a bunch of small print. They want to go to a nice, big screen. They can make it, we can zoom in like crazy if we need to, make things huge and make it really easy to read, really easy to use. And so for me, like that's how I found this side project was I just saw a need and it helps my local community and that gives me energy to do it. And so here are the constraints for me. It's not open-ended because it needs to do something very specific. The constraints are it needs to work with the existing data that we have, um, and it needs to be extremely simple. So the constraints are, yeah, simplicity. It needs to, at its basic form, it needs to search for grave records because that's what the binder does. And then the only other thing that I added was just the ability to potentially update a record. We never want to delete a record because all those plots, I mean, like they have somebody in them. We don't want to delete them. At most, we would want to modify them. Um, and we don't need to create any of them because the graveyard is essentially full. So anything would be, essentially modifying what's there. Now we may need the if they expand the graveyard, then we might need to add create functionality in the future. But for now, this is good enough. So for me, to answer your question, Morpheus, the constraints there literally came from asking the community what they need or what they want, and this is what they want. So there you go. Hope that helps a little bit. Maybe check around in your community. And I said this last week too. A lot of the times, libraries are wonderful resources, right? They give the community so much, but they often have big gaps as far as what they actually need and the skills that people are willing to lend to them. Um, so a lot of the times, volunteers for libraries, volunteers for community centers, they are often older, retired people. They have a bunch of time on their hands, but they just don't have the technical skills. They're doing everything on paper. They're printing things. They're, handwriting a bunch of stuff. You could think about, okay, what could I automate for them? What could I digitize for them? Because I'm going to be taking a spreadsheet of like 4,400 records, 4,500 records, cleaning it up, and then just uploading it in one shot into the Supabase database. I'm actually planning on doing that, not today, but this week. And I'm going to be taking 3 spreadsheets, each of which has different data in them, and uploading and turning that into one data source and uploading that into Supabase. And it's something that they have been doing manually, like manually updating these records, keeping 3 spreadsheets in sync manually. Whereas now with this tool, it's going to save them so much time because if they want to update a record, it gets updated once in one place and automatically by whatever you put in the form. So you could think about how can I help my community and start asking around to your local organizations, clubs, community outreach programs, especially libraries and sort of public service organizations, because they need the skills that you have. Yeah, so keep an eye out in the real world for unmet needs, problems, and frictions. Yeah, especially in those types of community service organizations. Because I mean, when I showed this, even just the read only, I didn't even have the update functionality built. When I showed this read only version to the library, like they were absolutely like overjoyed. It's just I can't express, like they were just like, oh my gosh, this is amazing, like this would have taken us months to do, and I did it in like a week. I built it in like a couple hours, and then I built it again on stream, so it took me like 2 hours to build the read-only version. And they were like, we would have had to hire an intern and like would have cost us so much money and all this stuff. And so you never know what kind of an impact you could have until you just reach out to these places and see what they need. And it gives me a lot of energy too to do something for them. Ragnarokin, thank you for the follow. Oscar double 0 7. Thank you for the follow. That's a tongue twister. Orange Knight OC, thank you for the follow. Sunday Dundee, thank you. Murdad 2929, thank you for the follow. as well. Damien, Dev, Clarify. Thank you all so much for the follows. I really appreciate it. But yeah, I think we're cooking. Again, if you want access to the repo, if you want to build something similar, please do. All of my code is available for you to use. Um, I you know the again, the data that I'm using in here is all test data. You can have ChatGPT generate data for you, just like this. Just say, hey, ChatGPT, if you want to build your own Supabase database and play around with it, once you build your table and you know what columns you're going to have, you can literally go to ChatGPT and say, hey, ChatGPT, generate me 20 rows of data for a SQL database with these fields and generate the insert statements for me. And it will literally generate the insert statements for 20 rows of data, copy and paste that into the SQL editor in Supabase, run it, and there's your 20 rows. They're all in your table. So it's super easy to do. Copilot can do it too. Hey, Copper Lily, you got it working. That's awesome. Yeah. And I know that Supabase can do even more with authentication than I'm currently doing. It can basically like control the sessions, it can control the tokens, it can do all those things. But in this case, I'm not really bothering with that. But I might in the future. I might do more with it in the future to have Supabase just control, all the session stuff, all the validation, that kind of thing. Yes, Rex Record. That's another good point. You can also use. There's also other tools that can generate synthetic data for you, like Macaru. There's another one I've used in the past. I'm just used to using ChatGPT at this point, but yeah, there's other solutions out there too that can help generate mock API data, mock database data, all that kind of thing. Yep. Yeah. So usually at the end of these streams, what I like to do. Oh yeah, go ahead, Rex Riker. Definitely link for it. Thank you. What I like to do is spend a few minutes just talking about whatever. So I think we're done with the app, but please do check out the repo. You can do exclamation point project for a link to the repo. It is there for you to use as to do whatever you want with it. If you do build something cool with this code or any of my code, please tag me on Twitter or your favorite social media so I can see what you built. Not because I want you to like sing my praises or anything, but just because I like to see what people build with my stuff. And see where you take it. So that's all I ask. I see 2133. Thank you so much for the follow. Oh, thank you, Rex Record. Yeah. So if you want to generate some mock data without using ChatGPT, definitely check out Mockaroo. But yeah, it's now a topic free for all. Whatever y'all want to talk about for the last few minutes, we'll try to wrap it up around 7. Just because I'm on call for work, so that kind of all of our automated processes start at 7, and that's when things can go wrong. So 7 o'clock, we'll stop it. That's in for me. That's in 15 minutes. So 15 minutes free for all. Ask questions, whatever you want to talk about, as long as it's appropriate. It's all good. Oh, thank you, BTW. It's a pleasure having you here. I'm glad you were able to stop by. Yeah, the goal is to be helpful and positive, and that makes it fun for me. I always say that if I ever stop having fun, then I'll just stop streaming. And so far, it's been 2 years now. I think over 2 years at this point, and it hasn't happened yet. So, doing pretty good so far. Hey, Cerebo, thank you for the follow. But yeah, what we generally do is, every week we build a project or we practice, job interview tips. I've done a few Ask Me Anythings. Sometimes we do code wars, leak code. We'll build something with React, MongoDB, Supabase, um, TypeScript. If you want to learn React, I did like a 7 or 8 part, I forget how many parts it was, a very many part React from scratch course a while back. You can find that on my YouTube channel. And I'll be publishing some more stuff to my YouTube archive here pretty soon as well. No worries, Ragnar Rockin. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Yeah, thanks for coming in. Oh, thanks, Narishka. Yeah, I appreciated your questions and comments, Narishka. I always love engagement because that tells me when folks are asking questions in chat, that really shows me what you're understanding and what you're not understanding, like what I need to cover more or something I didn't explain well. So I very much appreciate that. Hey, all too, good to see you. Yeah, you're welcome. But yeah, feel free to ask me anything. I'm pretty much an open book. If you have questions about me or about or if you want to ask the chat a question too, question for other developers or learners in chat, feel free to do so. Oh, no worries, 21. They said seeing the reaction to this project must have felt so rewarding. Yeah, it really was. Uh, Very considerate, have a great eye for these opportunities. Yeah, I mean, a lot of the times my main motivation to build something um, is like either frustration, like with a process that I'm doing, or like genuine like confusion as to why somebody else is doing something a certain way. You know, either it's a process that I have to do and I'm like, gosh, why is this manual? I wish I could automate it. Or it's like, why are they doing that thing that way? Like, I bet I could do this with an app. And it's kind of a challenge to myself of like, okay, can I actually talk the talk? And I can talk the talk, but can I walk the walk and actually build it? So that's kind of my main motivations for building stuff. BTW says, so we should expect you every Sunday? Generally, yes. I always announce on Twitter, or X, whatever. I always announce on Twitter if, whatever the topic for that day's stream is going to be, I will announce it at 10 a.m. Eastern. That's when I always send my tweets. So every Sunday, 10 a.m. Eastern, that's when I announce the topic for the day's stream. And also, if I'm not going to be streaming that day, then I will also announce it at 10 a.m. Eastern on that day. So every Sunday, 10 a.m. 10 a.m. Eastern, you can look for my tweets, and that'll tell you what's going on. Next weekend, no stream because I am roughly in the path of the eclipse, the totality eclipse that's going to be happening. That's like a once in a lifetime thing. And you better darn believe it, I'm going to be watching it. So I know it's not that day, but I'm going to, be coordinating and traveling and doing some stuff to get ready for it. So, um, yeah, I ain't missing that. I actually saw the last one too. It's weird. I lived in a different location during the last eclipse, and so I got to see that one too. Yeah, same. Can't wait. Yeah, it's going to be crossing the majority of the continental United States, which is where I live. Um, so I just happen to be lucky both times to get to see it. I know a lot of people. It's a lot of people saw one or the other, but got lucky, I guess. However, hotels are like $800 a night in the locations where the eclipse is going to be. It's ridiculous. So I'm staying with a friend, but yeah, it's going to be fun. Long drive. Yeah, it's going to be a drive for me too, but I'm close enough. I'm close enough so it's worth it. And even if I stayed where I was, I'd still see a partial version of it. I'm actually going to a place that's doing like a whole event. So it's more than just the eclipse. It's like the vibe. But yeah, it should be super fun. Yeah, Laylo shared they shared the time and date for the eclipse that's coming up. So yeah, check that out if you're not sure where it's going to be for you. Kapaloo says, last time I was way too far away, so I didn't bother. Yeah, it was wild. The last eclipse, that's when I was working in a factory, actually. I was an operations manager for a production facility. And we like shut down the production lines and everybody went out in the parking lot. And we all like, put on our eclipse glasses and went out in the parking lot. It wasn't even like we didn't see like the full eclipse, but it was like 90%. Um, yeah, and we all went out in the parking lot to watch it. It was worth shutting down production for a few minutes in order to see it. It was really cool. All right, any other questions? Morpheus says, I remember watching my first eclipse as a kid using a welder's mask. Yeah. Uh, don't do that in the future. Welders masks are not always rated properly for sun exposure. You should, so you can Google this, but there's a specific regulation that regulates like whether eclipse glasses are safe. So don't try to watch it through, if you're going to be looking at it directly, if you're not using like a pinhole camera or like a, some kind of if you're not like watching the reflection of it, then you should make sure that the glasses that you get are specifically rated, have an ISO rating for looking at the sun directly. Be very careful about that. Yes, thank you, Cerebo. Needs cert ISO 12312, 12312-2:2015. Yeah. So the glasses should say that on them. Morpheus says it probably wasn't. That's why I shoot lasers now. So you turn into Cyclops, basically. I mean, maybe worth it. But yeah, don't try to look at the eclipse through anything that's not. Don't try to look directly at the eclipse through anything that's not specifically rated for eclipse viewing. There are other ways to see the eclipse without looking at the sun. You can create a pinhole camera, which will reflect the light onto another surface, like the floor or like the ground, and you can watch it that way. They're really easy to make. So if you can't get the glasses, there's other ways. But yeah, you should be able to find glasses at most retailers if you're close to the vicinity of the eclipse. Um, might be too late to. Well, no, you can probably still get them offline, but be careful when you're buying them off the internet that it's from a reputable dealer. Wow, Copper Lily says, even though I was far away, you could still see the eclipse filtered through my hair. Thousands of shapes on the ground, really cool. Yeah, that's that pinhole effect. That's the pinhole camera effect. You'll sometimes see that with trees. You'll see the reflection of the sun or another bright object through like tree branches. It'll sometimes have that same effect, or through like your blinds on your curtains. If you have like blinds that are really close together with a tiny um, strip of visibility between them, you'll sometimes get that pinhole effect. You bring in your colander. Yeah, colanders will work for that too. If you have a colander in your kitchen, you can have it reflect the eclipse through the pinhole onto the ground. Yep, physics. It's cool. And I mean, that's basically how your eyes work, isn't it? Like your eyes have your iris, which is that little, or sorry, the pupil. My bad. Sorry, they have the the aperture in your eye is basically taking in a wide beam and reflecting it, again on the interior of your eye via that pinhole method. Eyes are funny. Your eyes are basically little pinhole cameras. Yeah, any other questions? We've got about 5 minutes. Ask away. Otherwise, we'll kind of start looking for somebody to raid. We always like to raid and spread the love. um, I'm going to be looking, but feel free to, you know I'll still be checking chat, so you can see who's online. Rady, rady. All right, who's online? Oh, I like this one. Terrible developer tries animating with Blender. Akapoli says, my glasses got delivered during this stream. That's awesome. This one looks fun. Terrible developer tries animating with Blender. Also, if anybody has any recommendations on someone we should raid, preferably someone in the game dev space or software or game dev space, just so we can kind of spread the love there. Doing some art. Hook the bot to MIDI. Ooh. Skyglass aircraft tracking. Interesting. Got some good ones today. Old timey computer show. Oh, Theo. Okay. What are they up to? Oh, it's Theo's birthday. Okay. Now, I will say, not that I don't want to raid them, but I want to kind of stick with smaller streams just to kind of give them a boost in the old viewer count. Um, but yeah, Theo's great. I think we've rated them before. Yeah, I think we'll go. We'll maybe do this. This person looks like they're doing something interesting. Terrible developer tries animating with Blender. So again, we've still got a couple more minutes. If you have any last questions, hack the algorithm. Yeah, if you have any last questions, feel free to get them in. Otherwise, we can go ahead and toss y'all over to JD Does Dev. Give folks another couple seconds. Okay, 10, 9, 8. Not seeing anything else. No worries, Renee. Thanks for stopping in. Thanks, everybody. All right, raid starting Where's the raid button? I always forget. Raid. Oh, here we go. Start raid down here. Got it. All right, folks. I will not see you next Sunday. Remember, no stream, eclipse, but the following Sunday, and we will do something else fun, probably a brand new project. But yeah, I'll let you know how this goes with the library when I roll out the full thing. I'll get it hosted. And yeah, I'll keep you guys updated on this, but we'll probably do a brand new project in a couple weeks. Also, keep an eye out on my YouTube channel for some new postings that I just need to make public. I got a huge backlog of content that I'm going to share with you guys. So keep an eye out for that as well. All right, folks, see you in a couple weeks. Have a great rest of your day. Happy Easter to those who celebrate, and I hope you all enjoy the remainder of your weekend. Raid is starting now. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and bye bye.